Hey everyone, Screenplay Archaeology host KiramidHead here. Just wanted to get some plugs out of the way before the new episode starts. We have now come under the umbrella of Fandom Live Media, which is also the home of the Table Reads podcast, which is a fellow unproduced script podcast, where they read said scripts out in full over several episodes. So if you like this subject matter and you're curious about a different format for it, definitely check those guys out. Not the least reason which is because you'll be paying tribute to my new podcast overlords, and that can only have a benefit. Also, check out the Shelved Film Podcast, which covers similar subject matters. They're not tied in with us, but I want you to go check them out. I want to make that recommendation because I'm just a nice guy like that. And as usual, be sure to check us out on social media on Facebook, Tumblr, and Twitter. We're on almost every means of listening to podcasts. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, a bunch of other places, especially now that I'm on a new platform which can distribute it to a whole ton of different places. So be sure to check out Spotify, Google Podcasts, stuff like that as well. And also a couple of things I want to throw in at the end. We do have a Patreon page. There's not much there. I can't really think of a rewards tier at the moment. And also, I have a Discord server that's been put together for a while, so if you want to show up and try that, as long as you're not an asshole, nothing will happen to you. You won't get kicked out. Just follow the rules. You'll be good. Check that link out down below. And with that, enjoy the episode. All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Screenplay Archaeology podcast. I'm your host, KiramidHead.
And I am guest Deusdaecon.
Back after quite some time.
Yes, it has been.
I just couldn't think of an episode to ask you to do because you always dodge those revisiting the old episodes once.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you couldn't get more perfect than this.
Yeah. And we're going to be covering two of the script drafts for the Justice League Dark movie, which has been on and off in development for the last several years. And it's like, they're doing it, they're not doing it. And I don't really think we need to go too much into detail on this one, but the basic premise is that it's the kind of low-level magical characters from the DC universe forming a bit of a hodgepodge of a team.
I mean, they had the animated film with Batman.
Did you actually watch that?
No, I haven't actually had a chance. It didn't really seem like much of a big deal, to be honest. But I'm sure I'll check it out eventually.
It's actually, the animated movie is actually not too bad. The thing with it is that it's part of that like shared universe they were doing, and they thankfully have now ended it, which also coincided with a drop in the animation budget, so the movies all look kind of cheap. But it was a little decent little movie, especially compared to some of the garbage they had been doing, like Justice League War, Son of Batman, Batman versus Robin.
It reminded me of the Constantine films as well. City of Demons or something, what it's called.
They're in continuity with each other.
Yeah. It was very similar art style, and of course, I come right in saying that Matt Ryman was in both.
Yeah, and they're both in continuity with each other, and they were written by the same guy.
Ah, there you go then.
J.M. DeMatteis.
Right.
Who also did a run on Justice League Dark. But the City of Demons thing pissed me off because they originally announced that as being an animated continuation of the live-action show.
Yeah, I read that as well.
And so when it came out and it was just a standalone thing tied to that shared universe of animated movies, I was like, fuck, go. Get out of here.
Yeah, I mean, the only connection really was Matt Ryan.
It was Matt Ryan, and in the Justice League Dark movie, they got the same actor who played Richie.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
And so, this project basically was something that when it was initially announced in November 2012, and it was Guillermo del Toro was working on it, and it was originally under the working title of Heaven Sent. And the idea was that it would be loosely inspired by the Justice League Dark comic, which was something that was introduced in the New 52. And I recently read the entire New 52 run of it, because the first part of it was written by Peter Milligan, who was the last writer to work on Hellblazer before that ended. And his run on that comic is not very well regarded, to say the least. He worked on it for a bit, and the storyline was this weird thing about Enchantress trying to find her host, and like it had like a cool kind of horror movie tone to it, but it wasn't that great of a story, and he left after clashing with the editorial at DC, as that tends to happen.
Yes.
And it kind of got reframed as more of a supernatural action adventure piece, and it basically reboots itself under the new writer. And there's like a pretty good storyline called The War for the Books of Magic, which is sort of reflected in these scripts. And then the next storyline just annoyed me because they build up the Books of Magic as being really important, and if an evil person has it, bad stuff's going to happen. And then the twist is that they're not really the source of all magic; they're just a glorified port key from Harry Potter, and they teleport you to another universe.
Right.
And there's like, and then so like the next arc is dealing with that, and it's not that great. What's really funny is because in that universe, there's like this field they put up to cancel out magic. So dead man who's a ghost, he comes to life again, and then immediately gets shot in the head.
Oh, for God's sake! He's like Brimmer from Red Dwarf.
Exactly. And that was okay, but it could have picked up from there. Like, I wasn't a fan of that arc. And then it got pulled into these two different line-wide events in the main Justice League book, and the way DC collects the trades, it just goes to shit, because they don't collect everything, they just collect the Justice League Dark issues, and it's confusing as hell.
Yeah, they do that a lot.
Because what they like to do is they like to sell the individual volumes for each book, and then they like to do one big book that collects the entire thing, and it's like, fuck.
Yeah.
It's not going to look good on my shelf. And halfway through that, J.M. DeMatteis takes over. And he has to deal with that shit, so I don't blame him for it being confusing. And then he gets his own little run. And it basically just it's weird because they kick John Constantine out of the team for really stupid reasons. And so it's him off doing his thing, and then you get some like personal stories with other characters, and it kind of ends on a meh. And it could have been a lot better. Like, it had its good points and it had its bad points. And I've not read the new series, because there's an entire new series of the book written by James Tynion, which has been out and has like the weirdest lineup, because Constantine's not in it that much. Wonder Woman is the team leader, which actually makes sense when you think about, because our powers come from the gods, and so they'd be magical.
Yes, but it's like, I mean, isn't that kind of like, how Wolverine was part of two different teams at the same time?
Yeah, it's confusing. But also in the group, it's Swamp Thing is still in it. Detective Chimp, who's a magic character from a while back.
That's a random one.
And Man-Bat, despite the fact that he's not magical at all.
No, I mean, he literally created through science.
Which, that makes no sense, but I have heard that book is pretty good, so I might look into it eventually. And apparently Zatanna's in a real reduced role as well, along with Constantine.
But
so getting into the development, it came out in 2012 that this was maybe happening, and then in 2013, Del Toro confirmed he was working on it, and they were using the working title of Dark Universe, which is what the script is called. So it's like called Justice League Dark, but it's called Dark Universe.
But I didn't really understand that. That's what confused me about the script as well. It's just, there's like no reference to it being Justice League Dark,
Well, that's the thing, is that nobody actually likes that title, it seems like. And it's actually treated as a joke in the comic, because they get together in that first arc, and then Steve Trevor goes to Constantine and goes, yeah, I guess we want you guys to get back together to look into this thing, and we're calling you the Justice League Dark. And Constantine's like, oh, that's a terrible name. It's like, we don't have anything else to call you.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the best name, but it's at least descriptive.
Whereas Dark Universe is just kind of, okay.
I mean, that's generic as hell.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it's so generic. Universal use.
Yeah, well, that actually plays into some things later on, as when we get into, the later phases of the project. But so he was kind of, talking about working on it, throughout 2013, that, they had a story Bible completed, and that they were hiring a writer, and that he was going to begin work on it after he got finished on Crimson Peak.
Oh, interesting.
And so that kind of takes us to this draft. Like, he was talking about stuff throughout those years, and he was saying that they were waiting on the go-ahead from Warner Brothers. And he was saying that I like this little quote here on Wikipedia, where Del Toro revealed in July 2013 that he hoped that the DC Extended Universe, which started with Man of Steel, would become as cohesive as the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And he added that if there was any correlation to that universe in this film, he would honor it. Which, yeah, it was not cohesive at all.
I mean, it's interesting that even Del Toro wanted to make connections to, wanted to make it more like Marvel. And yet DC are like, they want to be like Marvel, but they want to do it by doing their own thing, if that makes sense.
Which I can appreciate that.
Yeah. but it's just not working.
Yeah, it's just not working, and now we're in this weird place where we've got all these Elseworlds movies that are going on.
Yeah, which are not bad films. It's just, when they actually bring back continuity into these films, which they will be apparently doing, it's going to get very confusing.
Yeah, now we're in this place where we're bringing Keaton back and Affleck, and they're going to be in the Flash movie because they apparently don't think the Flash can carry his own movie. But yeah, so there's that, and he was also saying that he felt it would be able to coexist with the Constantine TV show, and that he was active in the writing process. And then later on in 2014, he said that it would be independent from the DCEU. And the way he describes this is really weird because apparently Warner Brothers, DC and Warner Brothers, they wanted to keep this film and Sandman separate so that when the time comes, they can unite them once they know they're quantifiable, which just sounds like DC didn't know what they wanted to do.
Yeah, that pretty much sounds exactly like that. They're like, we have these two properties. We have to get them together somehow. We have no idea what we're doing.
Yep, and he said that he was considering incorporating elements from the show and even thinking about casting Matt Ryan as Constantine, which who else are you going to get, let's be honest.
Yeah, I'm all for that stuff.
Yeah, in spite of the accent?
In spite of the accent, because it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's a bit hilarious when he constantly says he's from Liverpool, when he's clearly not. But apart from that...
And the comics establish that he has a London accent, so...
Yeah, it's all over the place. So, at least he's not a Los Angeles accent.
He's not Ted.
Yeah, which again, I'm one of the staunchest defenders of film. I just know that it's nowhere near accurate.
It's a good film that, if it were called something else, no one would really notice.
No, it's much better than it ever deserved to be.
It was one of the last really good Keanu Reeves films there for a while, because he spent like a solid decade before John Wick just doing trash.
It was the last film before his renaissance.
Yes. His Wickesons now even has a new Matrix movie. Like, go figure.
Oh, yeah.
And then in November of 2014, Del Toro confirmed that the script was complete and handed it in to Warner Brothers to be reviewed. And then that December, he hinted that, yes, it would be part of the DCEU. So it sounds like Warner Brothers was just flip-flopping on that.
It's hard to say what they were thinking because I don't know what DC's thinking. Yeah, it's... to me, it sounds like they wanted a very specific film that they could market the shit out of, just like Green Lantern, and they didn't get it. So they had to do other things, and it kind of got muddled, and it kind of got lost. Here we are today without a film.
And just to prove that they did indeed market the hell out of Green Lantern, the only Green Lantern trade paperback I have is of Secret Origin, the movie tie-in cover art.
Yeah.
With a Ryan Reynolds introduction.
Yeah, thankfully I bought Secret Origins way before the film came out.
Yeah, I've not even gotten around to reading Jeff Johns' Green Lantern because it's just there's so much shit.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, when it comes to Green Lantern, Jeff Johns writes well. It's just his movies are not that good.
Jeff Johns is okay, before we get too on tangent, I just want to say I think Jeff Johns can be a very, very good comic book writer.
Yeah.
But his biggest problem is that he became the king shit at DC and can do whatever he wants.
That is the problem. He needs someone, with the rolled up newspaper to say, no, stop that.
So because of that, because people liked bringing back Hal Jordan, we got him bringing back Barry Allen and sidelining Wally West and trying to make Barry Allen the center of the universe. And he created the Speed Force. Fuck off. You can tell I'm a Flash fan, people listening.
Yeah. Because a lot of that stuff kind of goes over my head, admittedly.
But yeah, I mean, I'd have to explain this to you off mic. Because it has nothing whatsoever to do with this. But yeah. And so I'm guessing the first draft was turned in November 2014, and that would bring us to this second draft, which is dated March 25th, 2015. Now, the storyline of this is essentially that the books of magic, which are super powerful artifacts, have been uncovered, and that everybody who's even somewhat plugged into the magic sphere or whatever can sense that they're there. And Constantine sort of gathers this team of, misfits together to stop it from falling into the hands of Jason Woodrue, who becomes the Floronic, who has his own plan that he's enacting. So yeah, there's some deep cut stuff in here. And it opens with John Constantine, and it points out that he's British, narrating about the clash between the forces of light and dark. And all while...
Very, very narrator voice.
Yeah. In a world.
Yeah.
And all while in East Antarctica, which I scratched my head trying to figure out how that works, because isn't everything in Antarctica north and south?
I bother specifying.
It's in Antarctica. It's 2 bridges over from the Thing spaceship.
Yeah.
There's a man whose face is covered in goggles and cold weather wear. He enters a cave and cuts into the ice, uncovering a pair of magic books inscribed in cuneiform, so Mesopotamia stuff. And then bad things start to happen immediately with a sudden eclipse blotting out the sun. And I like this because the books of magic in this, they talk a big game about them, but you see how just them existing in the world causes problems, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
It really sells their nature.
Yeah, that's literally what I was just about to say.
And from there we go to a freeway in Atlanta. And at first I was wondering, is this something he was incorporating from the TV show? Because that show bizarrely centered around Atlanta.
Yeah, that is a good point.
Where on top of the eclipse, we have really unseasonably bad weather, and a traffic accident have jammed the traffic, and there's like people reporting on it. And a hunched hooded man walks down the road, and he's got like a staff that he's tapping. And he's scattering red seeds as he goes, and we get tendrils and vines sprout from the seeds, causing massive destruction as a forest overtakes the freeway. And the man then... go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, when I was reading this the first time, because I remembered it was Guillermo del Toro, and I thought, is this the guy from Hellboy 2?
Yes, I was thinking that. This is my 3rd time reading it, and I just thought that, because they describe the things he grows from these seeds later on as being like elementals.
Yeah.
So it's exactly the same.
It really is. It's kind of, really, Guillermo? You did it again?
Well, he has motifs he likes to repeat.
Yeah.
And so, the man then looks at his hand, which is now looking like a desiccated bundle of sticks, and he injects himself with a glowing green liquid. Herbert West is jealous.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's just reagent.
Which regenerates his hand, and it looks like a melding of plant and flesh.
I mean, I would like to see that. It sounded like a kind of an interesting concept.
Yeah, and this is Jason Woodrue, the Floronic Man. That's basically what he is. He's a plant man. And so
they really do hide that for a very long time.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm not really sure what to think of it in this, because there's some weird things where it's like, he's a plant man, but he's not fully the Floronic Man yet. It's a little strange.
Yeah.
And so he walks up to a nearby news van and speaks into the camera, and it reveals that he's wearing a snowboarding mask with a skull on it. Like, okay, so he's Triple X?
Or, who's the guy from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
Casey Jones?
Yeah. Kind of Casey Jones kind of look as well.
Yeah. And he says that civilization is a cancer and that he's the cure, so he's Cobra from the Stallone movie.
Yeah, it's not exactly the most original position as well as a bad guy. It's very generic.
And we then go to a shabby motel room in New York City, where John Constantine is watching that report, and he recognizes the man as Woodrue, although it's weird because he doesn't seem to know anything about him later. And he monologues that there's a war coming, and, we need something to fight it, blah, blah, blah. And he lights up a cigarette. He does smoke throughout this thing.
I mean, the one thing I did like is that he tries to say something and he keeps getting cut off by his own coughing. That's a nice touch. But I think I said before we started as well, they just do the exact same scene from the Constantine film where he wakes up, coughs, and goes over to the sink, coughs up blood into the sink. It's literally word for word described exactly as that movie did it.
Yeah, he lights up a cigarette and he starts coughing and he coughs blood into the sink. Presumably because they didn't want to do what the comic story Dangerous Habits did, where he starts coughing and he hacks up a piece of his lung, and you see it.
I mean, it would have made it a bit darker, which if they were going for that.
But it's one of those things where it's like, I remember reading that in the comic, like, oh, ugh. Like, it was legitimately shocking that they went that far.
Which, is kind of the point.
But I mean, that's a case where, because it was a Garth Ennis comic, that's a case where he got super violent and didn't play it for laughs. Like, ugh.
Yeah.
And he looks, and there's a picture taped to the mirror. It's a younger version of himself alongside the stage magician Giovanni Zatara and his daughter Zatanna, so that's setting up that character.
I mean, admittedly, I'm not as well versed on Constantine. Is that a big thing between him and Zatanna?
In Justice League Dark, it is.
Ah, okay. That's why I was confused. I don't remember it.
Yeah, she never really turns. She shows up in Moore's Swamp Thing briefly,
right?
Along with her father, and they are in a scene together, but they don't really come off as a thing until Justice League Dark, and the whole thing about them being exes in that comic is really annoying because Constantine's being kind of sleazy about it.
Right. I mean, no surprises.
But like almost to the point where it's like you do realize Constantine isn't this much of a cunt, right?
Yeah.
Because it basically turns into she tells him he's an asshole, and he acts like an asshole. She tells him he's an asshole. Blah blah blah.
Well, over and over.
So it's like the Green Lantern movie.
Yeah. One thing as well, I like the fact that they stipulated in the script as well. They made sure and point out he smokes silk cut.
Yeah, that is true.
I like that detail because, like in the film, they didn't bother. It's probably because they couldn't do real life cigarettes, you know.
Well, I mean, I don't think you can really get silk cut here.
No, you can get them here. I know.
I don't think they're a U.S. thing.
Yeah, they are a UK brand because they've got the little. Well, they used to have the symbol on it that says, "Oh, the Queen uses these."
Now there was a Hellblazer issue where he's in America and he has to buy a different brand of cigarettes and he accidentally buys menthol.
Yeah.
But he continues smoking throughout this entire thing, which is pretty fun.
Yeah, and they make sure and point that out.
And we then go to Central Park, where Constantine, he's following a man named Carl Carnahan, past a couple tying a swordfish to the roof of their car, and there's a glass sheet secured to a truck, and there's like birds everywhere, and he eventually follows him into a diner, and Constantine is confronting him, identifying him as a rare book dealer, and he calls him a dabbler in magic, which is kind of funny.
I mean, yeah, and that's just a straight-up reference to the show, isn't it?
Yeah, probably. Who has recently acquired the books of magic, and he tells Carnahan, like, you're going to die in 3 minutes. And he wants the key to the safe he keeps the books in his penthouse. And Constantine freaks the man out so much, he takes a sandwich to go and leaves. And Constantine following him, and eventually Carnahan confesses he doesn't want the books anymore, as weird things have been happening around him. And he tells Constantine that the key is his right hand because the safe is locked to a handprint reader.
Yeah, and then it goes Final Destination.
Yeah, and this is actually based on a scene from more Swamp Thing.
Oh, it actually is a thing, is it?
Yeah, he also, I'm going to describe the scene, so... He also says that he's already sold the books, but before he can say who, the glass movers, they tilt the sheet to avoid some birds, which reflects into the eyes of the man with the swordfish, who swerves to miss some skateboarding kids, and the swordfish flies off the roof and impales Carnahan, killing him. And then Constantine steals a sandwich.
Yeah.
Which is really funny. And in the restaurant...
About them having pickles as well.
Yeah, and in the restaurant scene, he actually, the waitress tells him to put out a cigarette, and he does, and he lights another one.
Yeah.
But no, that's a scene from a more Swamp Thing, although I don't think there's quite as many moving parts there, but it's not Constantine, it's Jason Blood, who is like, who's taunting this guy about like all his sins and stuff like that, and he's saying, like, oh, you're going to die in like 3 minutes, and then the swordfish thing happens and kills him. And interestingly, that's also kind of the first Constantine appearance, because there's a bit where it's Swamp Thing's girl, Abby Arcane, is like looking on as this happens, and there's a guy standing next to her who was drawn because the artist just wanted to do a guy who looked like Sting. And then Alan Moore saw that and went, okay, I'll build a character around that idea. And that's where Constantine came from.
Interesting. And I suppose you could argue, I don't know if he did, I mean, in the comics, I'm not sure if he would have had the, that ability he has where he kind of sucks the luck out of everyone around him.
I think that's a very late thing.
Yeah.
I think
he got it from like a succubus.
Yeah, I think that's relatively late into the run. Because, I mean, the succubus comes in and out of Hellblazer.
Yeah.
Like, he has a special name for it, riding the something, but I can't recall it off the top of my head. The later runs kind of tend to run into each other in my head. And so Constantine, he bluffs his way into riding along with the corpse in the back of the morgue van, saying that he's his oldest friend.
Yeah.
After he stole the guy's sandwich. And he searches its pockets. And it's mentioned that, like, the bill of the swordfish is still in him, so it's tenting up the sheet. But he searches the pockets, and he checks the wallet, and he pockets the cash, bastard. Of
course.
And he finds a business card from Jason Blood, an antiquities scholar, and that's setting up basically that's Etrigan. They're setting him up for later. And, that was the man Carnahan was going to sell the books to, as Constantine figures. And he's then approached by Clarion the Witch Boy, who always shows up in a swarm of flies, who has apparently been, like, working as, like, the guy doing his legwork for Constantine, gathering information on Woodrue. It's very weird the way the character is introduced. He just kind of shows up.
Yeah, he's just there as if, oh, everyone should know who this guy is,
And he says that Woodrue is a botanist, and he's working on a doomsday plan called Project Inanna, which he wants to use the books of magic to enact. And Constantine's like, who's Inanna? And Clarion's like, I don't know. And then Constantine also asks Clarion for information on Zatanna, but then Clarion goads him into giving up a vial of astral energy first, which is like this little pink stuff in a vial. And Constantine's like, you're not ingesting that, are you? I'm telling you, it's not worth it. I know from experience. I'm like, okay, so he would use that to get high. And
I think, sorry, just about Clarion. I think the only thing I've actually seen him in was, I didn't see the episode, but he was in the new Batman Adventures, wasn't he?
I believe he was. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's notable because he basically just looks like, who is that guy from Dexter's Lab?
Oh, his enemy?
Mandark?
Mandark, that's it, yeah.
He just looks like him, but with horns. And it's a really stupid design.
But he taunts Constantine about how she's now dating an accountant. And then Clarion then snatches the pouch with those vials in it, turns into a cloud of flies, and buzzes off as Constantine lunges at him, which wasn't such a good idea as his momentum sends him crashing out of the back of the van and into the street. And he rolls over the top of a car and goes, I need a drink.
Yeah, I mean, the way it described it sounds quite brutal because he's like bouncing off quite a few cars.
Oh, and also during that scene, he's considering cutting the hand off, but it's too stiff from rigor mortis.
Which I'm not sure is a thing.
Yeah, it's a little odd.
Because it's like, rigor mortis is just about, it doesn't make your skin like rock, does it?
I don't actually know how it works.
No, it's not. It wouldn't be a problem, Tom.
Okay, and so this is where we go to Woodrue, and he's driving to work at the Sunderland Corporation in Atlanta, and we're getting his journal entries read out as narration. And he wants to wipe out civilization and bring things back to a time before time. And we see him...
of John Doe's diaries. Because he talks about having splitting migraines.
What is this from again?
In 7. Because in his diaries, he talks about having migraines and people causing him migraines and he wants to kill everyone.
Oh, yeah.
It reminded me very eerily of those entries.
And we see him, he's examining his body, and he injects the green fluid into himself again, narrating about how he's unstable and his transformation isn't quite finished. And this is all very strange to me, because he's apparently something of a plant man, but he still goes to work.
Yeah. After causing mass devastation, he still manages to go to work.
Yeah, it's very odd. So I guess the Sunderland Corporation just doesn't give a shit.
Yeah, I was expecting it to be a flashback, admitted. But it didn't really do that.
Yeah, it's a little strange. And he says he needs something else from Alec Holland, who is Swamp Thing. Kind of. Well, we're looking at he looks over at a clipped down newspaper article. It has a picture of Abby Arcane and Swamp Thing making out in the swamp. And that's the thing from the comic where they get like spotted by a tabloid journalist. And that's a whole thing from Moore's Run, which I never actually finished, but I do know that she gets thrown in jail and then Batman shows up and shames them into letting her out. I know that happens. Wow, Batman standing up for free love. But you hate rock and roll.
Oh, yeah.
And we go to Constantine, who's in the Interdimensional Oblivion Bar, and there's a bunch of occult-based DC characters hanging out, like Dr. Fate's there, Detective Chimp's there, a bunch of guys are there. And he asks the owner, Eddie Deacon, who has flippers for hands, to help him put together a team and gives him a list of names, all of whom are either cursed or hate Constantine's guts. And this is where we learn that Constantine once slept with Abby Arcane. We'll get more details on that later, and that's another thing from the comics.
And this bit also sets up a weird running joke where they're constantly telling Constantine, why don't you ask Dr. Fate or the Shadow Pact or something?
Yeah. He's like,
no.
I don't want to deal with the costumes.
Yeah.
And this is when we go to Louisiana, to Abby's Bayou Shack, where Abby Arcane apparently owns a bar. And I swear, this is a character to give the weirdest job positions to every time they adapt her, because in the 80s Swamp Thing movies, in the sequel, she runs like a flower shop. And in the DC, the sadly canceled DC Universe series, she's a CDC doctor.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just really strange that we took a character that in the comics, they just find her in Europe and she tags along.
Yeah.
But she's there, and then the hooded Woodrue enters, and he sits at the bar and orders a glass of water. And like people are talking to him, and they seemingly don't notice that he's half made of plant.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was like, oh, he only looks plant-like when he starts running out of that serum stuff. But it's very ambiguous.
And it says that he has like mushrooms growing out of his lip.
Yeah, it's very strange.
And he's watching Abby as she wins bets at the pool table and beats up one of the angry losers with a pool cue. So typical movie stuff.
I mean, I'm pretty sure that scene is in a lot of films.
Just thank God there's not a mugging in an alley scene.
Yeah. Or the Joker then takes a pool cue.
Makes it disappear?
Well, I was thinking about the scene where he snaps a pool cue in half and tells him to fight.
We're holding
a weirdly edited scene.
We're holding tryouts.
That was it.
Okay, yeah. And so that's going on. She gets a call from Constantine, and he's shooing off a chihuahua, which is just this weird. Why is this happening?
That was random.
Yeah, it was really weird. And she doesn't want to talk to him, but she listens after he clues her into what's going on, telling her to watch the news. And you see one of Woodrew's vine attacks that's happening nearby. And he tells her that Woodrew, and then, this is you get the idea where you get the idea that they have a history together. He's using Alec Collins' biorestorative formula to make this happen somehow, and that she needs to get Swamp Thing to help stop it. And so she hangs up and leaves the bar, and after she's gone, Woodrew drips water onto one of his red seeds and destroys the bar in the background, and she just doesn't hear it.
Yeah, see, that was what was strange, because she finds out about the destruction, like, the next day.
Watching the news.
Yeah.
And she drives out to the swamp where she tries to reach Swamp Thing, but he doesn't want to talk even after she strips down and walks into the water.
Yeah, he kind of goes a bit Dr. Manhattan.
Oh, yeah, and he does tend to do that in the comics where he'll get really moody.
Yeah.
And, withdraw into himself. And she tells him about Woodrew, and we get this weird flashback reflecting in the water where Woodrew was the one who blew up Alec Collins' lab and stole his formula, and they've kind of mushed things together here because it was kind of faceless agents of the Sunderland Corporation who did that. But they've made the formula part of whatever Woodrew's plan is here.
I mean, is usually the Floronic Man got anything to do with Swamp?
I mean, in Moore's run, he's the guy who... There's a story called The Anatomy Lesson where he captures Swamp Thing and he's examining him, and he's the one who figures out that physically Swamp Thing isn't Alec Holland.
Oh, okay.
So that's a big deal, and then he gets defeated because he's trying to tap into the Green, which is the network of all the plants around the world that Swamp Thing is part of.
Yeah.
And it drives him a bit nuts, and it doesn't work out.
Yeah, because that's one of the most alienating things about the script, which admittedly is not the script's fault, but there's a lot of stuff about Swamp Thing, and I know nothing. That's one of the few comic book runs I know literally nothing about. Well, that and Etrigan, which is unfortunate.
Well, I know basically nothing about Etrigan except for when he showed up in Batman the Animated Series.
Yeah.
And Swamp Thing then brushes her off, saying that he's no longer human and has nothing left of Holland in him anymore, but still gives her a small white flower, which he's going to wish he didn't do that.
Yeah.
And so we go back to New York, where Constantine has tracked down Boston Brand, a.k.a. Deadman, who's a ghost, who can hop between bodies, and he's currently staking out some bank robbers, and a chase scene ensues where Deadman is jumping between multiple bodies. He jumps into Constantine twice, and he doesn't like it because he's like, ugh, do you not work out, John?
Yeah.
And there's a bit where he jumps into an old lady, and he's hobbling down to her going, He's like, John, the old lady's in better shape than you are.
Yeah.
And Constantine follows, and basically the idea is that Deadman thinks that the driver was involved in his death and gets a lead from him before dropping him off of a building. And they actually do explain his backstory pretty well here, where he was this sort of circus aerialist who was assassinated, and so he has to track down his killer as a ghost.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really explain why he gets ghost powers and other people don't.
Yeah, it doesn't do that. He got it because of, in the animated movie at least, it has something to do with some Egyptian goddess took interest in him.
Oh, interesting. I mean, I only know Deadman because he shows up in Brightest Day. Yes, great.
Yeah, and I know there's that weird Jeff Johns fanboy Swamp Thing in that.
Oh, yeah.
Which nobody actually likes, but...
Yeah.
And so Constantine, he takes Deadman to a bar where he proposes that Deadman jump into Carnahan's body so they can get into his apartment building and get the lock open. And he doesn't want to, and he has a grudge against Constantine for using his ectoplasm to get high and then lying about it.
Wow. An interesting moment.
And I'm not sure if that's supposed to be the same stuff that was in the vials.
Yeah, I was going to question that as well, because it was a bit unclear. But it would make sense, I guess.
But then Constantine, he apologizes and he explains the stakes. He says the books, they're said to contain all knowledge, and he promises to use the books to make Deadman human again and help catch his killer, which convinces Deadman to go along with the plan. And all along they're being watched by one of Clarion's flies that they don't notice.
Is it? I thought it was Clarion as a fly, but apparently he has fly agents.
It's either he has fly agents or it's him as a fly. I'm not sure which.
Yeah, either way,
it doesn't really matter. And so we go back to Louisiana, where Abby Arcane's in her house and she's watching that TV report we mentioned earlier. It's like, you were right there. You didn't hear it? And Woodrew arrives talking about how he was Alec Holland's protege and learned everything he knows about botany from him, but they went down different paths. And he says Holland was too idealistic, which is what got him killed. And he makes an interesting line where he says, I don't know why something so beautiful would associate itself with such an ugly creature. And he's actually referring to Swamp Thing as the beautiful.
Ah,
which tells you something about his character.
Yeah, it does. It's an interesting sort of idea there. It does make sense.
And Abby blasts him with a shotgun, but another injection of the formula helps him regenerate it. And then Woodrue drops one of his seeds in a glass of water, which creates his thrashing elemental vine creature again that subdues Abby. And he says he needs Swamp Thing to move forward, but she won't say anything to him. But he notices the white flower Swamp Thing gave her, and he takes an interest in it.
Yeah.
So Swamp Thing made a mistake. And so we go from there to the Royal Theater, where Zatanna is performing an underwater escape, while Constantine and Deadman, who's possessing a woman, watch from the crowd. And the escape seems to go wrong, but after the curtain drops, Zatanna appears in the aisle unharmed and completely dry, so I'm just assuming she has that machine from the Prestige.
Yeah.
That's going to make...
Classic.
Yeah.
Chinese water torture misdirect thing. That always happens. It always looks like it goes wrong, but not really. Every time you see it in a film.
Yeah. And in her dressing room after the show, her boyfriend, Brad, goes to propose to her, but Constantine makes him spit out feathers to get him to leave.
That was very surprising.
That was very funny.
Yeah.
And Constantine makes the offer to bring back her father, to which she uses a backwards spell to throw him across the room. She tells him to fuck off in backwards.
Yeah, it didn't really explain what it was that she was doing. I just assumed that the script was like, oh, she needs to say a spell word, let's just write it backwards for now. I didn't realize that was literally what was happening.
That's her thing, is that she speaks words backwards to do magic spells.
Yeah, I didn't know that when I was reading it. I had to look it up. So I was very confused.
And this prompts Deadman, who has just entered the room, to ask if anyone actually likes Constantine, and then shows his ghost form to Zatanna, explaining he's a big fan of hers. And it's mentioned that only people who are clued into the supernatural can actually see him. And then Constantine then makes an offer to Zatanna to join his new team, saying he needs her to use the spells in the books if push comes to shove, and that they can use them to bring back her father. And it's like he's cursed and like trapped somewhere, but they also talk about him like he's dead. They never actually specify.
Yeah, it was very random because I was waiting for them to actually explain what the hell is going on. Because I thought, is he trapped in this little mirror she has? Or is that a vision?
I think that's a vision.
I was very confused.
Because there's this whole thing that he showed up to a seance he wasn't supposed to be at, which is their fault. Because basically, I'm going to say it now, because they apparently weren't supposed to be together, and then he showed up to the seance that they were at, and he got stuck. And it's sort of referencing a thing from more Swamp Thing, because the big arc with the Brujeria involves Constantine setting up a seance with all these different magical characters, and they're in it, and then a bunch of them die, including Zatara.
Ah, okay.
But it's not exactly referencing that. And she turns down the offer, but Constantine leaves her Carnahan's card in case she changes her mind. And there's a line here which is aged really badly, where Constantine asks her what she sees in Brad. She says, he's normal. He likes to make popcorn and watch The Big Bang Theory.
Ha! Yeah. That's not a good thing.
No. And even at the time this came out, that was kind of a dated reference because it was kind of past its prime.
Yeah, when did it finish?
I want to say it finished recently, but it's still gone on a long time. I don't know the exact dates, but it was relatively recent. But no, they leave, and then Brad appears to have returned, but it turns out he's being controlled by Clarion, who propositions her wanting to become her lover, but he gets really pissed when she calls him just a boy. And then he possesses a taxidermy bear, and then, this was hilarious, the stuffed rabbit from inside her magician's hat to attack her. Which she's like, no, Sprinkles, or whatever its name is.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it would have been worse if it was an actual rabbit. It does get torn apart.
Yeah, it would be worse. But she drives it off with like marionettes or something, and then Clarion, she drives him off and he swears vengeance. And so this is where he buzzes off to Woodrue's lab at the Sunderland Corporation, where he tells the mad scientist about Constantine putting a team together to claim the books. And
it's weird because, Clarion is basically the reason for everything. He makes it all possible.
Yeah, that's true.
And he's just doing it because he just wants to bang Zatanna.
Yeah.
It's a bit not the best justification.
No. Well, I mean, he's pissed off at being disrespected by people too, like Constantine. And he says, I'll help you get the books, but make me a man. And then Woodrue offers to show him something, and the lights go out. And then this is actually a cool visual transition, because sometime later, Abby comes strapped to a chair in the lab. And she sits across from a window, which looks into an operating theater where Woodrue, shirtless and sitting in a chair, and he's got like bark in his chest hair, they say. He has attached the flower from Swamp Thing to his head with wires and electrodes, and Clarion is with him, drinking another vial of the pink stuff. And Woodrue flips a switch, which connects him to the flower and to the shared consciousness that connects all plants, which Swamp Thing is a part of. And the connection alerts Swamp Thing to Woodrue's activities, but it also drives the scientist completely bonkers, and he begins to giggle madly. And whatever change he has undergone, it makes Abby scream.
Yeah, I mean, it was a classic, one of the classic change scenes, like Green Goblin in Spider-Man, or what's another good example? But it was like that classic, villain change scene.
Yes, the lizard in Amazing Spider-Man.
That's it. Yeah.
Well, let's be honest, the foe going was a lot more memorable.
Yeah.
But it was a cool scene. You could tell that was something Del Toro had some influence on.
Yeah.
And from there, we go to the New York City morgue where Carnahan's body is being kept, the swordfish bill still stuck in him.
Yeah.
And a well-dressed stranger identifies the body for a detective with a medical examiner looking on. And he offers to pick up the funeral expenses and hands the detective his card, identifying him as Jason Blood. And there's some conversation about his accent, and he says he's from Norwich, and that prompts the medical examiner to make a comment about Norwich. Something about knickers. Is that a thing?
Yeah, actually, it was a World War II thing where people would send different words to mean, like, can be kind of smutty or not. There's like other ones I can't remember off my head, but Norwich is like what does it say in the script? Yeah,
Knickers and something.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was.
Here, I'll find it. It's a digital script, so it'll be easy to find.
Yeah.
No, wait, it didn't come up. What? Knickers off ready when I come home, Norwich.
Yeah, that was a genuine sort of in like the more prudish times, coded words for smutty messages hidden in not so smutty and innocent seeming messages. I don't think it was World War II, but it was like it was a very British thing. But there's a whole host of them that they get increasingly smutty as well.
But no, he lowers his mask and reveals himself to be Constantine, and Jason Blood is like, oh no. I love how he has that reaction from everybody. So it's like, no, not you.
Yeah, makes sense.
And the detective is possessed by a dead man. But Constantine offers Blood the chance to join the team, but he refuses on account of Constantine selling him a fake grimoire the last time they met.
Which I'm pretty sure is something that was in. Oh yeah, that was from the film, because he says to Midnight, he's like, "Come on, Midnight! I thought the thing was authentic."
Yeah, and that's also something that happens in the books at some point as well. Yeah. I think it's in the
classic Constantine thing.
I think it's in the Azzarello run where the guy who's not Bruce Wayne tries to buy something and Constantine pawns a forgery off on him.
Yeah.
That whole weird comic where the villain is pseudo Bruce Wayne with pseudo Alfred and the pseudo orphans he adopts. It was a very bizarre run of the book.
Yeah.
And the lights flicker and Blood says that a hungry demonic spirit that's angry at Constantine is approaching. It could be any demonic spirit if we're being honest.
Yeah.
And Constantine has Dead Man jump into Carnahan's corpse right there. And the detective comes to...
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I thought that was a bit weird because prior to this, he was like, no, I don't want to do it. It's really, really painful. This is really, really bad. I don't want to do it. And then he's like, bang, done it. And it's not a problem?
Well, he has trouble moving in it.
I know, but it just seems... It's so strange how he makes a big stink about not doing it and then he's instantly in.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
But the detective comes to and freaks out and shoots the possessed corpse in the face, which was pretty funny.
Yeah.
And things get worse, though, when a massive swarm of flies buzz into the room, speaking in Clarion's voice and asking for the key. And Constantine plays dumb, and that's when the flies, they enter into the corpses, and they get up, their heads twist around 180 degrees, becoming unstoppable, quote-unquote, flesh puppets called the Invunce.
Which, again... I wouldn't be surprised if it's linked to the TV show.
And it's also a reference to the comic. It's a more Swamp Thing, where they were the attack dogs of the Brujeria. And they are not as intimidating as they should be because they look like short people in grass skirts with their heads backwards.
Mm. I mean, they were better in the Constantine TV show.
Yeah, the one that showed up was cool.
That was cool, and it was actually intimidating and creepy.
And then that two-parter just turned into The Exorcist.
Yeah, it really did.
Constantine, he felt the brushing of the wings.
Yeah.
So Constantine, he deduces that Clarion must have taken all of the astral energy he stole from him at once, and he tries to perform a teleport spell with an orb, which he has like all these different amulets on his necklace. He's kind of like Benny from The Mummy.
Although, again, that is kind of like in the film as well. He has that keychain.
Yeah, but that does seem like something that would be in the comics.
Yeah, that too.
The spell backfires, though, and they're forced to fight, and that becomes like a running gag of him trying this teleportation spell with varying results. And Dead Man's not doing so well because he's inside the corpse and he gets ripped in half and he has to run on his hands. And so
That's a cool concept.
Yeah.
If nothing.
Yeah, if nothing else, I mean, the look I've seen of the design for Dead Man from the later version of the movie looked really cool because he looked almost like a skinless guy.
Yeah, I like that. He's not just, painted grey. They actually bothered.
And so Dead Man... Yeah.
Sorry, carry on. This is random.
But Dead Man, Constantine, and the detective, they make for the freezer, but Constantine, he deliberately shuts Blood out and forces him to take on the form of Etrigan the demon, who talks in rhyme, because that's literally his position in hell as a rhyming demon.
Yeah, the rhyming thing. It doesn't necessarily work in written form, because I kept reading it wrong.
I like the fact that they put it in there, though, that they weren't afraid of having a big yellow rhyming demon.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cool thing, and it would be cool to see. And I think I saw the concept art, actually, as well.
Of the transformation. Yeah, I shared some of that.
Yeah, that was cool.
And also, the morgue scene is one of the concept art.
Yeah.
So yeah, that tells you that Lyman's version of the movie was fairly similar to Del Toro's. So, overcome by the Unvunche, Blood transforms, and Etrigan begins smashing its way through the undead puppets, and you don't see the full transformation until the end, which I think it's cool how they do that.
Yeah.
And while they're watching this go down and discussing that this is why Blood wants the books, two of the corpses inside become Unvunche, and they get up and they kill that poor detective, splattering his blood everywhere before Constantine picks up the detective's sidearm and kills them. So yeah, they're not really unstoppable. Maybe if they could see where they were going, they'd do a better job.
Yeah, that's true.
And Constantine gets an idea, and once Etrigan has dealt with all the Unvunche outside the freezer, and trying to spell that word was fucking painful for me in my notes, and he opens the door and he tricks Etrigan into running inside, where Constantine has drawn sigils on the walls in the detective's blood, which forces Etrigan to change back into blood. So blood makes blood turn back into blood.
Also, again, because I mentioned before we started, it's very difficult to not see parallels to the Avengers. So obviously, Etrigan is the Hulk, because he basically has the same character arc. And you've got, what was the other one I mentioned? You've got Swamp Thing as well, who's a bit like the Hawkeye, because he's barely in it.
And
he does more stuff.
Would that make Constantine the Tony Stark?
I don't know. It's hard to say. Possibly, because he's the one that's organizing it. He's certainly not the Captain America.
There is no Captain America in this.
No. But you've got, I would say, Dead Man is Thor. The closest thing I can think of, at least.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah, but I think a lot of this is just, if you're making this kind of movie, there's certain things you do. And I feel like a lot of this was inescapable, especially since Etrigan is similar enough to the Hulk.
Yeah. I mean, they could have also not used Etrigan, I guess.
But I mean, I like the fact that they put Etrigan in here because he's kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting character and very different to the kind of usual superhero, so it makes complete sense.
But he's also, interestingly enough, he's not actually a member of the Justice League Dark in the comics.
Yeah.
The only time he was a member was in the DC did this weird thing in the New 52 where it was like this thing called Future's End, where like every book would have a tie into it where it would show what was happening like 5-10 years in the future, and Etrigan was a member of the team in that, and he was with Zatanna as like a thing.
Oh.
Not Jason Blood, Etrigan.
Oh, okay.
That was weird.
Yeah.
And so Constantine, he once again makes the offer for Blood to join the team, and he grabs a bone saw to cut off Carnahan's arm, as they can't pull off that deception anymore, which is kind of makes you wonder why he didn't just bluff his way into the morgue and just do that.
I mean, that's true. I mean, they did seem to skip over a few easier methods.
But so Blood drives Constantine and Deadman to Carnahan's penthouse, and Constantine explains about Woodrue and Project Anana along the way, and Blood explains that Anana is the Sumerian goddess of love and war, which that is correct. They got that right.
Yep.
And And that's when they arrive with Deadman. He possesses the building security guard to get inside the building, and there's like a newspaper where apparently the Shadow Pact is completely stumped by what's going on. And Constantine has to make the comment, well, it looks like the costumes aren't up to it.
Yep. Running joke.
And so they head up to the penthouse where they look around and they find a secret staircase hidden beneath a bookshelf that had old chestnut. Like, it even has you pull a special book off the shelf to open it up. And it leads to the door with the handprint scanner, but it turns out Constantine cut off the wrong hand.
Yeah. I don't know what to say about that. That was just a really stupid moment that just seems to extend things at least a little bit for no reason.
Yeah. But they get bailed out because Zatanna arrives on the scene and she uses her spells to open the vault. And so it turns out the vault consists of the entire floor below and is full of artifacts like dead animals, pickled fetuses, and there's even a marijuana growing room.
Yeah.
That was pretty funny. They find the books of magic, which are held in some kind of magic red sphere, and Deadman tries to reach in and gets knocked on his ass. Constantine tries to stab with a special spear. He gets knocked on his ass, and then Zatanna suggests using a scanning spell, which she and Constantine perform together, and it's meant to look very sexually suggestive.
Yeah, it gets very sexual.
Which there is a moment in early in the Justice League Dark comics where they perform a spell that kind of looks like that. So I guess that's like one of the only things they drew.
Yeah, probably. Is this where there's the Cthulhu reference?
There might have been a Cthulhu reference.
Because you've got Zatanna does one of her reverse, and then Constantine just says Fungluи Munglaf.
Yes, that is there. That's it.
And it's so random.
Yeah, but they're looking at the books, and Blood, who's the antiquities expert, he can read the cuneiform, and it says it's a book of spells. One of them is. And the lights begin to flicker, and that's when Woodrue appears, who spawns in through the marijuana. That's a sentence.
Yeah.
But that is a power that Swamp Thing has, where you can spawn in through any plant, and there's an issue of Hellblazer where he spawns in through Constantine's cigarettes. He's like, not me duty freeze, there were the last smokes I had left. And he actually breaks off part of Swamp Thing and puts it into the rolling paper.
Oh yeah, I think I remember seeing that as a kind of a meme thing.
And so now he's fully become the Floronic Man, which is one hell of a supervillain name.
Yeah.
And Clarion's fly swarm appears as well, turning the pickled fetuses into baby Invunche, and Deadman is like, no, I reject that.
Yeah.
And they're like stepping on them and squishing them. Like, this borders on just like really dark comedy.
Yeah, it was kind of graphic, but in a good way.
And so there's a fight ensues, and then Constantine knocks down the Floronic Man with a turnabout spell. You know, I am rubber, you are glue, blah, blah, blah. And a fight ensues, and then that happens, basically hitting him with his own attack, and they flee. But Blood drops one of the books, which is sworn by the little Invunche, and two of them get squashed by it.
Yeah.
And
it's really inconsistent to how big they are.
Well, these are
even like a pickled fetus is not big enough to be crushed by a book, surely. I mean, I guess it depends how big the book is.
I think they're meant to be really big.
Fair enough.
But yeah, and so that's not good because we need both of them for them to ultimately work, for their purposes at least. And so they seal the bookcase entrance behind them and run for the elevator, but some sort of psychic interference makes it not want to close, even with Zatanna using her magic. And then Floronic Man spawns through the nearby ferns, and she makes the door close, and the car starts to descend. But then he rips open the doors of the shaft and grabs onto the elevator cables. And so Deadman, who's still in the security guard's body, he climbs onto the roof of the elevator, and he gets swarmed by the dead animal in Bunche just as the elevator cables snap. And he jumps into Floronic Man's body, but is completely lost inside the labyrinthian mind, which is a cool image.
That was a cool moment, actually.
And the elevator car, it plummets, and it gets stopped with a soft landing at the bottom where it's been caught by Swamp Thing, getting his little badass entrance moment.
Yeah.
Because this is the first time you really truly see him.
Yeah, because he's supposed to be like all in shadow for the most part.
Because in the earlier scenes, you hear his voice and you see his eye, and that's it.
Right.
And Floronic Man, he drops down the elevator shaft and begins to fight Swamp Thing, saying he intends to use Abby as a sacrifice to heaven to do blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And the fight spills out into the streets with both of them becoming giant size, and Swamp Thing, he says that Floronic Man, he thinks he's helping the planet, but he's actually hurting it, and he's rotting it with his desire for power.
Yeah.
And the rest of
it was kind of almost anticlimactic, because Swamp Thing says that to him, And instead of doing the expected villain thing was completely deny. And he was like, no, I'm actually helping. He was like, no, that can't be. And he kind of believes him without much evidence, which is a surprise.
Yeah, it was odd.
Mm.
But the rest of the group they're teaming up to working as a team to fight off the Invunche, and it looks like Pharaonic Man is winning his fight with Swamp Thing, tearing him apart. But a single seed falls into a fountain, causing lots of plants to spring out and destroy Pharaonic Man's current form, freeing Dead Man in the process. And that part is also very Hellboy too.
Oh yeah.
And so they move on to an alley where Constantine uses a special set of lenses to locate the entrance to the Oblivion Bar, also very Hellboy.
I mean, that is literally from Hellboy 2.
Yes, and it's a running thing with Del Toro because it's described as the lenses being they're asymmetrical and that there's two on one side and one on the other. And that's a thing that he always wants to put in his movies, but he's never actually found a place for it. He talks about that in Cabinet of Curiosities that he always wants those asymmetrical goggles, but he's never actually managed to do it yet.
So strange.
I mean, have you seen his movies?
Well, I mean, okay, fair enough.
And he also has this weird interest in optometry, which is basically the entire reason Charlie Hunnam's character in Crimson Peak even exists, that you can get a scene with lenses and stuff.
Yeah.
And they gather in the private back room, and they try to open the book they have left, which has no subtitle, and it's here that Dead Man explains what happened when he was trapped in Pharaonic Man's mind. And he was contacted by Madame Xanadu, who, interestingly enough, is a founding member of the team in the comics.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And she tempted him with a vision of being human again as long as he stayed with her. And she also showed him a vision of the past of the goddess Inanna sending Gugalana, the Bull of Heaven, against Gilgamesh in response to him rejecting her. And
so many weird names.
Yes, this is all from mythology.
Yeah.
And what's actually really funny is that if you look up Gugalana, the one of the possible translations is the Canal Inspector of On. Yes, bow before the mighty monster, the Canal Inspector. And every step it took on Earth wrought death and destruction, but Gilgamesh and Enkidu managed to kill it and seal its corpse within the necropolis of Erech. So yeah, this is cool that they're throwing in an actual mostly accurate recounting of the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
And a Dead Man realizes this is what the Pharaonic Man wants to unleash and plans to use Abby as a blood sacrifice, but specifically her because he wants to lure out Swamp Thing because he wants to try and get him on his side, but he's also the only real threat, so he also wants to lure him out to destroy him. And Dead Man decided to come back to the world to help stop this, so he sacrificed the possibility of being human again to help out.
Yeah.
That's a very odd little moment there, because I'm not sure exactly what's going on.
It is a bit confusing.
It's also interesting because Jason Blood should know who Madame Xanadu is because they're both remnants of King Arthur's court.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Because Xanadu in the comics is Nimue, and Jason Blood was a member of the court as well.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, that comes up in the script.
Oh, did I miss that then? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, we'll get to it. We haven't gotten to it yet.
Oh, I must have skipped over a little bit. I do apologize.
And so Blood, he then Googles the books of magic to try and find a way to open the one they have. Which is okay.
Oh yeah, the Googling was annoying because it's like, oh, we just found all the information we need right here. It's so annoying. I hated that.
Finding that the person either has to be the purest of heart or the darkest. And they're like...
Which is a weird thing.
Yeah, and so it turns out Zatanna fits the bill for the former, and she's able to open it. And the way...
There is an annoying joke where she's like, well, I'm not purest of heart, and Constantine's like, oh, I know. Like,
I thought that was funny. But it opens, and it reveals this huge shaft going really deep, full of books. Like, that was really cool. It's like the book is a TARDIS.
Yeah, that was cool.
And so Zatanna uses her magic to ask for, maps showing the locations of dead cities, and a blank slab is like lifted up from the book, and they're looking at it, shaking it, and they figure that it must be a container of some sort. And Constantine just smashes it open. And they're sifting through the maps, and there's a bunch of different names in here. Let me look that up. Yeah, he says Babylon, no. Lost City of Z, nope. Atlantis, no. And I'm pretty sure Aquaman would object to Atlantis being referred to as a dead city.
Yeah, that's true.
Because, in fact, it is very much alive.
Maybe that's why it's not there then.
But they're looking, Blood sifts through them until he finds the right one, and he locates Erech as being northwest of the Zagros Mountains in Iraq, and they act like this is a surprise.
Yeah.
This whole thing, the geography here is weird because you can't be northwest of the Zagros Mountains because they run on a northwest to southeast axis.
Ah.
And also, they seem to mix up Erech, Ur, and Baghdad, which they're not the same place. And we know where the ruins of Uruk are, so this whole thing is a little weird just because of that.
I love it when writers put in, like, bits of information to make it seem like they've done their research, but they clearly haven't looked at it enough to get it just right, you know?
Yep.
So they make really dumb problems when if they'd just looked into it a little bit deeper, they would have seen it.
Yep. That whole thing is just weird. And I do think it's kind of funny that it's like, oh, it's a Mesopotamian mythology thing, and they're surprised it's in Iraq. Like, really?
Yeah.
And so they need a plane that can quietly get them there, and Zatanna says she has one, which it turns out is her official show plane, which is bright pink with her name on it, which I thought was kind of funny.
It's funny, but I wouldn't really associate her with bright pink.
Yeah, me neither. She seems more like a black and very dark gray person.
Yeah, it's like, is the film saying she's Katie Price? Which you might not know who that is.
No, actually, I don't. I don't think I want to know.
Yeah, you don't want to know. I'm not going to go into it.
But, they're heading there, and they're going to meet with Abbas Mahdi, who is a contact of Blood's, so he just knows people everywhere. And as they prepare to take off, Swamp Thing elects not to travel that way, and he gives Constantine a leaf of his that he can wet with water when they get there.
Which is convenient.
Yes, and though that's something Swamp Thing can do is that he can go into the green and he can spawn out of any plant anywhere.
Yeah, so why would he need to give them a plant?
Yeah, that is an interesting thing. And this is where you get the more backstory where he was struggling with his transformation, and so Swamp Thing sort of cut off his human contacts, and then Constantine took advantage of this to sleep with Abigail.
Yeah.
Which they do sleep together in the comics, but it's this weird thing where he's possessed by Swamp Thing.
Huh.
And because Swamp Thing needs to make a child for some reason, and he lacks the parts to do that. And it all ties into Hellblazer in a weird way that doesn't quite add up because it was a last-minute addition.
Okay.
But, yeah. And it all ties into the Zed and the Resurrection Crusade thing, which would have meant something if they went there in the show, but it doesn't.
Hmm.
And so Constantine apologizes, and he's saying, oh, you're the key to all this, and that there'll be no humanity left for you to resent if they fail. And he's also says he's glad that Swamp Thing joined the team, and he says he thinks they're doing well for a first outing as he boards the plane. I mean, they're kind of doing well.
Debatable.
They're making it up as they go.
Yeah.
They're Indiana Jonesing it. And so we're on board the plane, and this is where you get the backstory for Zatanna and Constantine and her father, which we talked about earlier already, so we don't need to go into it. And she also asks, who's paying him to find this? And he says, no one's paying him. He's totally on the level, and maybe I'm a better person than you thought I was. And Blood tells Deadman a bit about his backstory here because he's rubbing the Philosopher's Stone, which he got from Merlin, because he was Merlin's apprentice, and that Etrigan was bonded to him by Merlin.
Oh, yes, I did read this. Sorry, I got very confused. That's why it didn't register my memory. Because, yeah, there's a lot of detail here that I couldn't quite keep track of.
Yeah, it's fairly dense.
Yeah.
And also, interestingly in the comic, Etrigan the Demon is actually the half-brother of Merlin, because Merlin's father was a demon. I just found that out recently. I thought that was interesting.
Very strange character.
Yep, and while this is going on, the Clarion Fly has entered the plane, and he finds the maps in their little carry case and then buzzes into the cockpit. And the plane lurches as if something landed on the wing, and Zatanna heads to the cockpit to ask the pilots what's going on. But they've been turned to Invunche, and then she quickly closes the door and turns to the other passengers and says, we have a problem.
Seems a bit overpowered that Clarion can just make Invunche at any moment.
Yeah.
It's like the Matrix, the agent.
Yeah, it is. At least it's not like Matrix Reloaded, I guess.
Yeah. Although, sorry, come to think of it, fight scenes with Invunche instead of Smith would be a visual sight.
But okay, so where was I? And so the plane lurches again, and Constantine lifts up the window flap and looks out, and there's a massive blue creature tearing at the wing. And I guess this is a reference to that Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really weird reference, and I don't know why it's there, but it's for sure based on the TV show and the film,
Yeah,
because they did it twice.
yeah, the George
so
Miller,
random.
the George Miller segment.
Yeah, it's really weird.
And he tries to get Blood to turn to Etrigan to no avail, and that's when the Invunche pilots burst out of the cockpit. But Zatanna takes care of them by making the fire extinguishers in the overhead compartments fall on their heads. Very Three Stooges.
Yeah.
And then the blue creature peels open the side of the plane and is talking in a voice that reveals it to be Clarion. And so the plane heads into a dive, and Zatanna is slammed into the ceiling and knocked out. The dead man possesses her to continue the fight. And Blood, still strapped into his chair and ignoring Constantine's pleas to transform into Etrigan, gets sucked out of the plane, U.S. Marshal style, and Constantine loses the Swamp Thing leaf briefly. And so Dead Man in Zatanna's body shuts himself inside the cockpit and is actually trying to right the plane by pulling on the stick. And then Constantine, he gets the Swamp Thing leaf back, heads to the bathroom to water it, but the taps aren't working. And then the toilet is yanked away when Etrigan re-enters the plane. And it seems at first that it's going to kill Constantine, but he wards it off with a crucifix. He's going, "Nice demon, sir, nice."
Yeah.
And so it sets its sights on the Clarion monster instead, and those two are duking it out, and Dead Man is trying to pull the plane out of the nosedive, but it doesn't work, and Constantine's hanging on for dear life. And so the plane crashes into the desert, and Constantine finds himself next to a crate filled with bottled water. Convenient.
Very cool.
That's one for you there, Bridget.
Yeah.
And so the Clarion monster approaches. Constantine quickly douses the leaf of some water, which summons the Swamp Thing. But Clarion stuns it with its claws just long enough to make off with the map and escape. So they've done fucked up.
Yeah, pretty much. And it was just it was a big set piece, but it was a big set piece that didn't really do much. Like, everyone is in the right place they were supposed to be. It's just the bad guy got some map, you know?
Well, they're not in the right place. They're in the middle of the desert.
Well, I know they're not in the exact right place, but they are closer than they were.
Yeah.
Is it what I'm...
And then we get a bit where Zatanna's unconscious and they do the CPR thing, and then Blood wanders in from the desert, mumbling different phrases to himself before telling Constantine that he's done and he can't do this anymore, because as he says, every time he turns into Etrigan, he loses something of himself. A bit like what they were talking about in Thor Ragnarok with the Hulk.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's not the fault of this script. That was 2 years after this.
Yeah. Maybe they stole it from this script. Ooh.
I kind of doubt it. That night, so they're all sitting around the fire except for Swamp Thing, who's standing away from it. And the rest of the team tell Constantine they're ready to quit. Let Dr. Fate's people do it. Again.
Running joke.
And that's when it finally comes out. Not only does Constantine tell the rest of them about his lung cancer, Dead Man found out about it when he jumped into his body earlier. But then he admits that he was the one who, wanting a way to put things right, uncovered the books of magic, so he was the guy at the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
And he couldn't use them, though, and he ended up losing them in a card game, which is very Constantine.
Yeah.
And so he apologizes to all of them for getting them involved, and he walks off into the desert by himself to try and fix things. And he just so happens to find the boss waiting for him in a Jeep at an airstrip.
Yeah. There is a lot of contrivances at the end of it. Right?
Yeah, and some of them don't exactly fully add up.
I mean, in fairness, again, a lot of the contrivances would make sense if you incorporated Constantine's luck, you know?
Riding
But I don't think they were going for that.
Riding whatever the fuck he calls it. God, that's driving me crazy.
Yeah.
It was something slipstream. Serendipity slipstream, synchronicity stream, something like that.
Synchronicity, I think, is a word that was used.
It's something like that.
Yeah.
And so they drive off together, and Abbas is explaining that the coordinates he got from Blood didn't make any sense. But before he can say any more, they get stopped in an Iraqi military checkpoint, and Constantine once again tries his teleportation spell, but it only moves them into the back of a military truck where they're promptly caught and captured.
Yeah.
And they're then put in a prison cell alongside a third prisoner with a sack over their head. And then a guard shows up to come take them out of there, and as they're marching across the prison yard, a captain runs out, screaming about how they're not supposed to be released. And then the sack prisoner uses a backward spell to remove their chains, so she was Zatanna. So I'm thinking, how did she get in there?
Yeah, it doesn't really get explained. How did she know that they were going to be put in the... I don't know, magic, man, magic.
And, the guard was controlled by Dead Man, which that makes sense.
That makes sense, yeah.
And they make their escape in a pickup truck driven by Jason Blood. And Swamp Thing is chilling in a weed form in a dirt pile in the truck bed, and he shoots out a vine to redirect the truck that's pursuing them. And then following Abbas's lead, they go to like this bad area in Baghdad, and they find the looted Ur Archaeological Museum. Now, Ur is a completely different place from Uruk, and it's also not in Baghdad. So yeah, just getting my my weird obsession with archaeology out of the way.
Yeah.
And that's where the coordinates stop, and there's a massive set of iron doors, and he says the coordinates say they're supposed to move beyond them, but there's only solid mountain there, and none of these locations are anywhere near the mountains. You see, all they would take to fix this is just pick a random fictional name and say it's in the mountains.
Yeah. But I think it's a thing writers do. They have a need to be specific, even if it's a detriment to their own story. I've noticed it so many times.
Yeah.
Who was it? Paul W.S. Anderson does it all the time. He gets specific, which then makes no sense.
Oh, yeah, you're thinking of his explanation of the zombies.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Where he just repeats the old wives' tales about corpses that were attributed to vampires in folklore.
Yeah, stuff like that. It's that weird need to be overly specific when it's just not necessary.
This pyramid shows all three cultures.
Yeah.
But Constantine wets the leaf again, and Swamp Thing grows to giant size and yanks the door down, revealing a tunnel. And they follow the tunnel to a vertical shaft and descend a spiral staircase to the bottom. Then Constantine, he finds the way forward with an amulet, and Swamp Thing smashes the wall open. So he's become the big guy, and even makes a joke about being in the one-man demolition crew, which is pretty funny.
Yeah, he becomes the Hulk.
For this portion of it.
Yeah, for that brief moment when they don't have it.
And so they find themselves in a massive underground arena with the bull's skeleton laid out in the center. The canal inspector skeleton.
Oh, yeah.
And they seem to have beaten Floronic Man there, but that's when Abbas shoots Constantine in the stomach, revealing that he was being controlled by Clarion the whole time. And why did you bring them there?
Yeah. Could have just not bothered.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what's happening. But that's when the Floronic Man appears, tracing sigils around the bones with the blood of Abby, who's tied to a stake behind him. And how did they not see them there?
Yeah.
And he recites from the books and turns to cut Abby's throat with his scythe, only for Deadman to jump into her and pull away from the blade and break free from the ropes. And I can see him being able to do that because he was a circus guy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it does cut her just slightly, and a few drops are shed, though. And it's enough to complete the ritual, so Pirates of the Caribbean rules.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
You know, back when Pirates of the Caribbean had simple shit like blood sacrifices. And Blood then willingly turns into Etrigan, so that's his I'm always angry.
Yeah.
And Clarion takes on his monster form as the two clash. And Swamp Thing, Zatanna, and Deadman, who's in Abby's body, they all attack the Floronic Man to no avail, and Swamp Thing gets held up by those vine minions. And Gugalana, the Bull of Heaven, fully resurrects, smashing through the ceiling and emerging in the middle of Baghdad, spreading rotten death with every step. So this is a pretty cool climax.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of wished that it wasn't just like a sudden end boss kind of feeling. I kind of wish there was more of it. Because it's just one fight, really, you know?
Yeah, I get what you mean. It kind of turns into Pacific Rim right here at the end.
Yeah, or it kind of felt like the Destroyer from Thor.
Yeah.
You know? Just a bit disappointing.
Yeah, when Thor decides he's going to sacrifice his life for the people he's known for 2 days.
Yeah.
Could have used the montage in there, guys, just saying. And so Zatanna attacks the bull with her powers, magic to freeze it in place for a moment. And then the Floronic Man, he tosses Constantine up to ground level along with Swamp Thing. And seeing that the bull is about to break through Zatanna's spell, Swamp Thing rises to his feet, grows to giant size, and fights the bull head on. So it's like Pacific Rim crossed with bullfighting and pro wrestling, and it's honestly pretty cool.
Oh yeah, if this was a film, this would definitely be the standout moment, as it should be.
And Zatanna, who has collapsed next to Constantine, she touches his wound and fills it with blue light, and I guess she heals the bullet wound. And then they have a kiss, which is kind of like, we don't need to put them back together.
Yeah.
I feel like keeping them as exes would be more interesting.
Well, yeah, because, I mean, it's Constantine. He doesn't have stable relations.
Well, largely because every time a new writer comes on the Hellblazer, they like to toss away the previous supporting cast.
Yeah.
And that's when she goes back to the fight, and that's when Etrigan crashes into the bull, falling to the ground before righting himself, and he breathes fire at the Clarion monster, who falls to the ground in a heap of flames, and their fight continues. So you have two fights kind of going on simultaneously. And the Floronic Man, he emerges from the hole, clutching the books, and compares them to Moses, and he seemingly is controlling the bull with his commands, and Swamp Thing starts to get consumed by rot. And then Dead Man leaves Abby's body and tries to possess the bull, only to be met by a vision of the land of the dead, and he just goes, "Fuck that, I'm out of here," and leaves the bull's body. And Abby...
Sorry, I just want to note one thing as well. I'm very confused. When Clarion goes up in flames, I don't know why he screams "mommy."
Because he's a little kid.
Is that really what it was? It was just so random.
I think that's the point. I think that's what's supposed to be.
Really? Because I was like... Because at this point, I'd kind of forgotten about that aspect.
Yeah.
Because it was like such a long time ago when they mentioned it.
Yeah. You're just a little blue boy. And everybody says "lil."
I guess... I mean, I don't really know the character that well, so I guess... kind of...
There are other uses of the word "little" where they say "lil" instead, so I guess that's just a tick of the writer.
I guess, yeah.
But no, he sees, Abby there, and he's reinvigorated, and he fights back, and green plant life is sprouting up every time he attacks the bull. So that's kind of his Martha moment, I guess.
Yeah.
Thank God the Floronic Man doesn't piss in a jar.
I'm sure it'll be fine after 4 hours.
And he doesn't force feed anybody Jolly Ranchers either. That shit really happens in BVS, people, if you don't believe me. Lex Luthor leaves a jar of piss on the desk. Yeah.
But anyway.
Zatanna fires a blast of magic at the Floronic Man, knocking him over, and Constantine jumps on him, pounding at him with a crucifix. And the Floronic Man grabs him, making him start to rot from the feet up. So yeah, he's getting fucked up. And Zatanna and Swamp Thing are now fighting the bull side by side, making it feel real pain. And Constantine gets an idea. He's like, "Oh, all these plants, huh? Must be a lot of oxygen." And he flicks open his lighter, which I know you're probably imagining being the lighter from the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Which is your favorite lighter.
Yeah.
And he causes a massive firestorm.
And I don't think that's how it worked. Because if there was that much oxygen, I don't think they'd be able to breathe.
Yeah.
It's a bit ridiculous.
True. And this destroys the Floronic Man, Clarion, and the bull, and it very nearly destroys Swamp Thing, but Abby and Zatanna save the tiniest of seeds from his body, and Abby's tears bring him back because she's Pikachu.
Oh, God. It was so saccharine.
Yeah. And they then find that Constantine's body is missing, with only cigarette butts and his lighter left, so he must be really in bad shape if he left his lighter.
I just like the idea that when Constantine dies, he explodes in a kind of like in MMORPGs, explode and all your items scatter. It's just cigarette butts.
And the books have also been reduced to dust and destroyed. And Zatanna pockets the lighter, and as they leave, there's this weird moment where Abbas climbs out of the hole, and he sees the city on fire, and it's just an odd sort of... I don't even know how to describe it. Like, it's this weird kind of, like, dark moment.
I felt like they were trying to make some kind of political statement.
But I'm not really sure if it works.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it could be a political statement, I guess. Maybe.
Yes, we totally resulted in a giant bull running rampant.
Yeah, it's very...
It's like the John Carpenter Masters of Horror episode Pro-Life, where he tries to make a point about the pro-life, the whole pro-choice, pro-life argument, and then has a demon show up and kill people.
Yeah. Gives up halfway through.
And then Constantine is still alive, though, having been teleported by his orb into a wrecked bomber in the desert. And sick of trying and failing with that spell, he tosses it, and it settles on walking. And I will say, I like the fact that they don't actually resolve the cancer thing here.
No, yeah, that's just left as a plot line.
Like, I actually like that that's left hanging, because you could do a little bit more dangerous habits in the sequel, potentially.
Yeah, I like the idea of not doing all of Dangerous Habits, but just interweaving parts of it. Because you could easily do that.
Like setting up the cancer as the status quo.
Yeah, exactly. And then, move it along, and it gets worse every movie sort of thing.
Yeah. And it cuts to 6 months later as Dead Man, who's in the body of a 90-year-old, is chasing down a thief, once again looking for leads as to who killed him, and then Constantine then appears saying he knows who did it. And he's getting the team back together. He says he always keeps his promises, and that's where it ends. So overall, I'd say it's a good script.
I mean, for someone like me, who I have no concept of Dark, it was a fairly decent introduction. My only issue was that it felt more like a constant movie with cameos. I know that's not what it was, and everyone did have nice sort of set pieces, but it just felt a bit Constantine heavy.
Like he was sort of like the normal person to introduce the audience to this stuff.
Which I think because it takes a while for the others to get introduced, and they're all introduced through Constantine. I think if they'd have had their own introduction to the event rather than him going to them or him finding them would have been better.
Like, for example, if they showed Zatanna's show earlier, and if they maybe showed a little bit of Jason Blood earlier.
Well, what you could have done is have Clarion propose his liaison with Zatanna without the Constantine stuff, and have that happen before they meet.
Oh, that makes sense.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So you could have interwoven their characters better without having Constantine being the sole driving force there.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you mean. It doesn't bother me as much as it does you, I don't think.
Yeah, I guess it might.
But overall, I would say it's pretty good. Like, you could tweak it here and there to make it better, but I think it's a good example of this.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I would be perfectly fine with it.
Yeah, it's far, far from the worst things we've read.
Yeah, and it's by far not the worst DC movie.
Oh, what would you say is that, Green Lantern?
I mean, that's pretty...
Well, I mean, Catwoman does exist.
Yeah, true. It's low bar, though. You've got a lot of stuff to go through.
Steel.
Oh, Jesus. Now we're getting old school.
Superman 4, Batman and Robin.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of bad Marvel movies, too, though. So.
Batman vs. Superman. Oh. Yeah,
let's just keep kicking that hornet's nest.
Yep, there's no getting away from it. It's terrible. Just terrible.
I like the warehouse fight. But yeah, to get into a little bit more like behind the scenes stuff. So this is essentially Guillermo del Toro's draft. And so his involvement kind of, kept chugging along for a while in 2015. And it was supposed to be something that it was going to be, if he was going to direct it, it was going to be the next thing he did after Crimson Peak. And he said in April 2015, the revision had been turned in, and that if there was availability in his schedule, he would direct it, and maybe he would produce it if he didn't. And so he kept going on about it, and then eventually he left. He left like sometime in like August of that year. And what happened is that he left because he got the chance to do Pacific Rim 2. That just got the green light.
Right.
So he left this project to do that. Now, unfortunately, he ultimately didn't direct that movie, and the movie kind of sucked.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say if it was a result of Del Toro not being part of it, but it certainly didn't help.
I mean, I feel like if he had been involved, it would have been a better movie.
Mm.
But yeah, no, so that was two birds got killed with one stone there.
Yeah. Wasn't it The Shape of Water after Crimson Peak as well?
Yeah, he ended up moving on to The Shape of Water after Pacific Rim 2 didn't work out. So we kind of won in the end.
Yeah, I mean, that's arguably one of the best films he's made in a long.
That's the one that got him his Oscars.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't really deny that.
And now he's working on other stuff I'm not really overly familiar with. He's got a Pinocchio thing coming out on Netflix.
Yeah, I saw the Pinocchio thing. I'm not too sure about that, but it's gonna be weird.
Set in like Mussolini era.
Yeah, it's gonna be weird. He's also doing some kind of Michael Mann documentary.
Yeah, and he's doing like he was working on like a Fantastic Voyage remake, but that apparently got pushed to the side. And he's doing a remake of a movie called Nightmare Alley. It's supposed to be a noir thing.
Yeah,
I think it's Bradley Cooper.
I don't know anything about that. I just recognize the name.
I think it's partly set in a carnival.
Hmm.
That's all I know about it. I mean, I'm interested because he's doing it, but it's not something that immediately jumps out at me.
Yeah, I mean, if it's Guillermo del Toro, I'm interested. That's the way it goes.
Even his not so good movies like Mimic.
I mean, I kind of like Mimic.
Mimic's okay, but the thing with that is that I had read The Cabinet of Curiosities, which is all his like concept art and stuff.
Yeah.
And in that, he talks about all the ideas he wanted for that movie that Miramax wouldn't let him use. And I'm like, ugh. And then I watched the movie and I'm like, oh, it could have been this.
And then, of course, he had his weird cameo / acting thing in Death Stranding.
Oh, he's in that?
I mean, he's technically in it, but he's also not. It's really weird.
I don't get that. I don't get...
I'm pretty sure it's just his life.
So many people are in that. Like, how did they get Mads Mikkelsen in that?
I guess he just asked and gave the money.
Well, Hannibal season...
He seemed like someone who really,
choosy.
He doesn't seem very choosy. Yeah.
Like, well, Hannibal season 4 isn't happening anytime soon. Sure, I'll scan my face and then read some lines into a microphone.
I mean, that's the majority of the stuff he does. He just talks.
He just talks to readers.
Well, not even readers. He just talks to a unidentified viewer listening to his weird monologue.
Oh, okay. I didn't know anything about that. So, yeah, that covers that script, and that leads us into the next script, which is sort of like a transitional thing because it's in between the directors who are working on this.
Yeah.
And so that moves us on to the next draft, which is a revised draft. Well, I mean, it's a revision, but it doesn't say it's a revision on the title page, and it doesn't specify what draft it is, but it's still called Dark Universe. Still written by Michael Gillio and still based on Del Toro's treatment. Now, how much of this comes from his ideas, I can't really say for sure because, he's been gone for months by the time this script is written. It's dated April 1st, 2016. So this is the first official post-BVS draft of this movie.
Oh, really?
Oh,
I mean, that makes sense, yeah.
I mean, it would have to be because BVS was end of March.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I didn't connect that.
Yeah, it's one of those bizarre things where they just went, yeah, we're going to release our big tentpole movie in March. 2 years after that stopped being an interesting thing to do, because I remember when, this is a tangent, but when the MCU released Winter Soldier at the beginning of April, I was like, what? That's weird.
Yeah.
But now to get into this one, the story it hits almost all of the same beats as the original script. They've just sort of reframed who the bad guys are, so I don't need to give a new plot synopsis here.
But it's pretty much, it's like I said, it's the same plot, just moved around slightly and added things for better or worse, which we'll get into.
And so, starting off, we get the same opening in Antarctica. There's the same opening narration from John Constantine, only this time there's only one book, and this instead of the Books of Magic, it's the Book of Darkness. And I actually stupidly did not research to see if that was a DC thing. And this time we actually see the guy who is retrieving the book. It's a guy called Nick Necro, so it's not Constantine this time. And he opens the book, and a shaft of life shoots out of it and projects stars on the cave ceiling. And Necro quickly shuts the book and leaves. And instead of an eclipse, there is now green thunderclouds over New York. And we get the Constantine motel room scene again. And there's a line in his narration I forgot to mention last time, but I actually really like it where he talks about tricking the universe into giving you something you haven't earned. It always, comes back to you, because that's right from Hellblazer, and I thought that was cool. They worked.
Yeah, it's a nice touch.
And he's not watching TV, and there is no picture of Zatanna here. He finds that later, so he's not a stalker in this one.
Yeah.
And I have to talk about Nick Necro, because he's actually a character from the Justice League Dark comics. And I hate that.
I did have to look him up, admittedly.
Oh, you did? Okay, because I was going to explain him to you, but I hate that character so much in the comics because throughout the War for the Books of Magic arc, because Felix Faust is sort of like the main, public face villain, that the one you always see, but there's always some hints like, Felix Faust isn't this powerful. There's got to be like someone behind him, and it's like, ooh, it's someone Constantine knows from his past. And me being the Hellblazer reader, I'm like, oh, is it Papa Midnight? Is it the First of the Fallen? Fuck, is it the King of the Vampires? And like, no, they cut, in the way the trade collects it, it cuts to Justice League Dark #0, because back during the New 52, DC for some reason decided that for like a month, every book had to do a #0 and tell like some kind of origin story. Even when they're in the middle of telling an origin story, like Batman 0 Year has a #0 in the middle of it, which didn't make any fucking sense. But it's this whole new backstory that they've concocted for John Constantine, where Nick Necro is like the guy who teaches him everything he knows about magic, and then Constantine steals Zatanna away from him, and then he tries to trick Constantine into getting his soul dragged off to hell, but then Constantine tricks him back, and his soul gets dragged off to hell, and it ends with him, I shit you not, he takes Necro's trench coat off and puts it on, and that's the origin story for the trench coat. Fuck.
Oh, for God's sake. That's like when the X-Men films gave an origin film for his baldness, Xavier's baldness. God's.
Yeah.
That is so stupid.
Or X-Men Origins Wolverine, where they give an origin for his jacket and then he loses it. Yeah, but no, the character is just annoying, and he dies in the War for the Books of Magic arc, and then he comes back later in the middle of those annoying events that the comic got caught up in. And it's just like, oh god, go away. He sucks. And I actually kind of, when I first read this draft, I was just going like, oh god, what are you doing here? Fuck off. And then he fucks off.
Yeah, that was surprising, considering, because like I said, I did a little bit of research, and I thought, oh, this is going to be the new Woodrue, you know?
Yeah.
I thought Woodrue was gone, and this is the new guy. But no, he just dies. He just dies really, really quickly, and it's so pointless.
Yeah, he's just here to die, and Constantine to call him a wank. That's the only reason he's here. And I was like, yes, fuck him. It's okay. This is when we go back to Nick Necro. He's walking through the rain, heading to his basement apartment beneath a Bronx pet store, and the pets are all going crazy, and he gets bit by a chihuahua. So there's that chihuahua again.
Yeah, I don't know what is up with that.
And in his windowless apartment, there's all these artifacts and stuff, and Clarion the Witch Boy and Jason Woodrue are waiting for him, and there's a green vapor carpeting the floor, and they want to know who hired him to find the book, and he won't say. And then Woodrue drops one of his red seeds, which, the water dripping off of Necro, lands on it, and it spawns a vine monster. And I keep calling them vine monsters because that's kind of what they're called in the last script, but here they're specifically described as looking like Cthulhu, to the point where they're just called Cthulhu creatures for the rest of the script. And I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah, it's, again, it's like, it feels like it's just a shorthand descriptor, I hope, because I don't know why they would go full on Cthulhu. It seems ultimately pointless. So it must be a descriptor, but it's a very random thing to use as a descriptor, especially when there is still that Cthulhu reference later on.
Yes, and it gave me odd flashbacks to the Del Toro At the Mountains of Madness script, because that script notoriously has a superfluous Cthulhu appearance at the end. Which, okay,
that should be a trope.
I just have to say, I'm not overly proud of that episode I did on that script, because it's my first episode, and I think I'm just being a little too mean. And I also didn't do my research very thoroughly on that, because I've since read an interview where Del Toro said that was when he was making it at Fox at that point, and they insisted on Cthulhu.
Ah, well, time for a revisit.
Yes. If another draft ever gets out, I want one of the later ones. Yes. I want the full cruise. But so he finally relents, telling them that he was hired by a nut billionaire named Heinrich Haas, who basically is taking on Carnahan's role from the last script. So it's just a different...
Yes, and it's pretty much the exact same character as well.
Yeah, a little bit of differences, which we'll get to. But Necro also tells them that Constantine is looking for the book as well, and that's dialogue that was Clarion's in the other draft, and it's been moved much earlier.
Yes, which I kind of prefer.
Yeah, because the first draft is a little messy, but I will say overall I do like that one a bit more. We'll get into the reasons for that.
Yeah, and I prefer this one, probably for the opposite reasons as well. Again, we'll go into that again.
And I'll get into all my reasons, because there's things scattered here and there that I'm not overly fond of, and I'll talk about. Because otherwise, this is still a good script. Like, it's solid, well written.
Yeah.
And so he tries to cut a deal, but Woodrue rejects that idea, and he has the tentacles crush him to death. And you see his eyes explode from his head, which is
it's basically the same description from the previous. Because the previous one had the exact same description, just for a random character, like a police officer, I think it was.
Oh yeah, when they're on the freeway.
Yeah, so it just moved that to a more prominent position.
And we also see Woodrue using the formula to regenerate here, which doesn't make any sense because he doesn't have a history with Swamp Thing here.
Yeah, I was going to say that the whole regenerating formula thing, and his transformation, none of that happens. So it's like, it's even more pointless now. It's like they clearly left this in from the previous script and didn't realize why it was there.
Yeah, which doesn't seem like something Del Toro would do.
No, absolutely not.
And they also are both shown to have grinning green skulls in their eyes here, Clarion and Woodrue, and that's building to something.
Yes.
And so this is where we get the Central Park diner scene, which it's mostly the same as before, only with Haas instead of Carnahan. And we learn here that the book is in fact the Book of Darkness, so it's a different item. And Haas also has a history with Constantine, like he knew Constantine and he knew Zatara, and he talks about how Zatara used to think highly of Constantine. He says, oh, you used to stand for something, and then Constantine just tells him, well, you should have hired a professional instead of a wanker like Necro. Yeah. And that's the last Nick Necro gets mentioned in this entire thing. I'm like, yes!
People rejoice.
There was much rejoicing. Also, here, Constantine, because, okay, in the previous draft, I didn't mention it because it slipped my mind, but Constantine's sort of reason for knowing that Carnahan is going to die, like he actually throws him, what I thought was actually kind of a cool reference was, he mentions Destiny of the Endless, and he says, oh yeah, your fate's written in his book. I was like, oh, cool, little Sandman reference.
Yeah.
And here he says he knows he's going to die because he sold him a cursed object. And I was like, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Which is totally Constantine.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the Reeves Constantine should have thought of that when dealing with Papa Midnight.
True.
And okay, so Haas tells him that he wants the book destroyed, and he says it's being kept in the House of Agibi, which is in Babylon, which is weird because they use the actual modern-day name of that area later in the script.
Yeah.
Unless it's meant to be just like a tick of like sorcerers or whatever, that they refer to it as Babylon still.
I mean, that's what I assumed. I didn't really think about it much more than that, really. It didn't seem like a mistake anyway.
I mean, it stuck out to me because remember, I put all that thought into the locations in the last script where it's like Uruk or Baghdad. Where are we?
Yeah, true.
And he also says Constantine should need a crew for this job. And this starts a thread, which I'm not overly fond of in this version, where there's all these references to the team having been together before and then they fell apart. And I'm like, do we really need that?
Yeah. I mean, considering that this is the first film, it seems a bit superfluous.
And it just seems like a weird backstory that's never fully explained.
Yeah. It explains how Constantine is able to go, okay, I need this person, this person, this person. But it's not.
It's just like, I don't know, it just feels weird. Like, it doesn't quite add up. It's like, oh, we were a team before, but we're not anymore. And that's like the main thing everybody hates Constantine for in this version, whereas in the other one, everybody just didn't like him for their own reasons, and I just like the idea of him going and gathering these people and it being a conscious act to make a team of these kind of lower characters like that they're not the superheroes.
Yeah.
Although, if they were trying to fit this into the DCEU, none of like the talk of like, oh, let the capes handle it would really make sense because there really isn't a team until the first Justice League movie.
That's true.
But the timeline of that universe is just bizarre when you think about it.
Yeah.
Haas, he mentions that he hired an expert to examine the book for him, and that's setting up for Jason Blood. And then the swordfish thing happens exactly the same way here, so that Swamp Thing comic reference still happens.
Yeah.
And Constantine is bluffing his way into the morgue van, and he gets spotted by Detective Jim Corrigan, new character, who is suspicious of the man's presence at bizarre incidents and says he'll be watching him.
And of course, you know, I'm wondering, because I don't know if it was in the script or I might have misread it. Where does this take place?
New York.
So it does indeed take place in New York. So in that case, I suspect this script wasn't meant to link with the TV show, because Corrigan is from New Orleans, and it doesn't make sense for him to be in New York.
Yes,
in the TV show.
Even the way Del Toro described linking it to the TV show, it sounded like he was going to be kind of loose anyways. But
yeah.
Considering the date on the script, the show would have been nearly a year past its official cancellation, so I mean, they probably weren't thinking about that. This is around the time, I think, when they first started talking about, like, oh, we're going to do an animated series, and then they fucked us by turning it into an animated movie that they chopped into pieces and called a series. I'm still pissed about that.
It wasn't bad, but
it was just all his engines, which is not the greatest Hellblazer story, which the show already adapted in a single episode, so that's about half the running time of that movie. Okay, so the morgue van scene proceeds, and Constantine, he finds Blood's card, as he did in the other one, and he finds Haas's bank card, which he needs for the vault. And there's a picture of Zatanna and Zatara in the wallet, so we get that here. And Clarion and Woodrue just appear, making him an offer to join them in return for his cancer being cured. And when he refuses, they give him a vision of a massive tumor emerging from his throat and encircling him like a python. That was creepy.
I mean, that scene was creepy, but I very much preferred Clarion's appearance in the ambulance in the original, in the first draft, because it was just so out of really nowhere. Like, if they seemingly can find him whenever they need to, they just do it. And then that happens, and it's just, too contrived. I prefer, it was more natural in the first draft.
Although I like that he's a bad guy from the,
I was just about to say that. Sorry.
I kind of do, but I kind of don't.
I mean, I know what you mean, but I actually preferred that, because that was my biggest complaint about the first draft, was that Clarion just kind of insinuates himself with the main bad guy's plot, whereas here they start as the same bad guy. And I prefer that because it makes the plot less muddled.
Yeah, true. But when we get to like the big C where they talk about their motivations, that's where I start having issues with the character. But we'll get there. Right. And Woodrue blasts Constantine with some magic light, which throws him out of the van and into traffic, where he decides, yeah, maybe I do need a team. And okay, the thing that scene kind of starts a thread with this, where they're just able to teleport in wherever they're needed for the plot.
Yeah, because it's plot contriving.
Because Woodrue can't teleport in through plants like he can in the other draft. He doesn't get those powers till like right at the end in this version. Okay, so Constantine, he goes to see Zatanna, and it was kind of weird how different this scene is from the previous draft, because she went from having a show in like a big theater and like an adoring audience to performing in a storefront for a bunch of heckling drunks.
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense though, because she still has the private
dressing room.
Huh?
She still has the what?
The jet.
Well, no, it's her father's jet in this version.
Oh, okay. I suppose, yeah. It still seemed a bit weird that she was so down and out and yet was able to have that, even if it was her father's.
It's just such a weird difference that they go from, hey, I'm a celebrity to, I'm in a storefront. And she leaves before it can really start, and Constantine, he follows her to the Oblivion Bar. And this is a detail I forgot to mention about the other script, is that in the alley outside the bar, there's graffiti on the wall saying, "Who watches the Watchmen?" So a little reference there.
That was really crap. I didn't like that. That was just such cheesy. And I would have, if I saw that in a film, I'd be like, fuck off.
And so he bribes the bouncer to get in using those pink vials from the previous script, where instead of giving them to Clarion, he gives them to the bouncer.
I thought that was weird. It was like, well, why did you leave that in? It's a bit like it just seemed like a leftover that we can't get rid of for some reason. I don't know.
Especially since later in the script, he has no problem getting
in. Yeah.
And so he enters, and he gets into a scuffle with Black Orchid and Nightmare Nurse, who are being like the protective friends for Zatanna. And interesting point, those two characters are actually members of the team at different points in the comic. Black Orchid was weird because they never quite explained what was going on with her, and Nightmare Nurse comes in way late and starts getting this, and gets like an entire arc built around her origin, which was interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I preferred this version of all of that than the previous one, because it felt less like a set piece and more an actual thing that was, operational within the universe. Does that make sense?
You mean the original version of the bar scene?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually like folded into the plot here, and you still get all the cameos of like, there's still like Detective Chimp and other people hanging out here.
I kind of want to see some Detective Chimp film.
And also, I think they took it out for this version, but in the other version, there was a reference to Shade the Changing Man being in there, and he was also briefly a member of the team. And
I didn't.
That character is just weird. I don't really get him. He has like an amazing Technicolor dream coat that can alter reality or something. I really didn't get what was going on with him.
Okay. But new one on me.
And so, and Constantine, they start talking. He starts talking with Zatanna, and we find out that Constantine disappeared for 5 years after Zatara died without a word to her, which is why Zatanna is so pissed. And they actually do explain a little bit more of what happened with that here, so that's a good thing. And so he proposes, getting the group back together. And she's literally about to kill him, and it's almost exactly like that scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark where he's like, these Arabs don't care if we kill each other.
Yeah.
But then he...
Also, sorry, I like the fact that they got rid of the random Clarion hitting on.
Yeah, I get what you mean, but it does kind of water down his motivation a little bit.
Yeah, I suppose, but it just seemed a bit too...
weird.
Superfluous.
But, she's about to kill him before he mentions the Book of Darkness, saying need to retrieve it to keep the balance between the light and the dark, as that's what her father would have wanted. And then she headbutts him, but then agrees, and he suggests that they go to recruit Deadman. And so
slightly different order there, because it was Constantine and Deadman going to recruit her. So it's an interesting change.
Okay, so we move towards a back alley church near Times Square, and we hear the Spectre monologue about how corrupt and decadent humanity has become. And Woodrue and Clarion, they speak to the Spectre in the church confessional, he's in the priest's half of the confessional. And you can only see a green mist that seeps out of the slat from there. This is where Woodrue explains his hatred for civilization. And I thought it was funny that he referred to it as an air-conditioned nightmare. And I'm like, oh, just move to Europe. They don't believe in air conditioning over there. And Clarion complains about being bullied. And I'm like, who's bullying Clarion the Witch Boy?
Yeah, especially because we don't see any of that,
Yeah.
It would have been nice to actually see at least something of that to encourage, for it to make sense, even.
Yeah.
Because there's just nothing. It was just going on his word, and it's like, it just makes him seem like a bit like a whiny bitch.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And that's my thing is about the villains. That's what I don't like about this version is that bringing the Spectre in and making him the main villain, I feel like it waters down the other two because they're just sort of, they're much more generic henchmen in this.
Yeah, oh yeah, they basically become just henchmen. It's nowhere near as good as the first script.
Because Woodrue in that first script is very well defined. He has all these like creepy scenes where you get what he's about, and it all relatively makes sense. And Clarion also has a more fleshed out motivation, whereas here they're just there.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, like I said, I like the certain things they did with, but the Spectre doesn't need to be there at all. It could have just been those two. They were enough. I don't know why they didn't think they were enough. They're good enough villains. And yeah, it just makes them seem less important.
Yeah. And so the Spectre, and honestly, I don't know enough about the Spectre to say if this portrayal of him as like this rampaging villain is really accurate.
From what I've seen, cause, being a Green Lantern fan, the Spectre inhabited Hal Jordan. And the Spectre has always been slightly closer to the anti-hero side.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for Hal Jordan kind of bringing him back to the good side of it, he would have been a bit more, punish everyone regardless of who they are, blah, 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 kind of stuff. So it's not too far off. It is a bit over the top.
Yes, because the only things I really know the Spectre from, not counting those 2 episodes of Constantine, because he really doesn't become the Spectre by the end of that series, unfortunately. No. But I know him from Kingdom Come, where he's the guy who's escorting the pastor around, who's witnessing, the events that are causing the end of the world in that comic, which is really good, by the way. Yeah. And I read part of the Jeff Johns Flash with Wally West, where the Hal Jordan Spectre shows up in Cosmic Recon, some stuff.
I didn't realize he did a cross the Flash.
Yeah, there's a thing where, like, I won't go into it too much because it's complicated, but basically Wally West has always had the public secret identity. Like, he doesn't have one, really.
Oh, it's just a bit Tony Stark.
And so bad shit happens to him, and then the Hal Jordan Spectre shows up and offers to Cosmic Retcon that away so that he can have a secret identity again, which just reeks of Jeff Johns being Jeff Johns, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I know you.
And so we get the chase scene that introduces Deadman. It's pretty much the same, only Zatanna is involved, and she gets possessed for part of it, and it ends much quicker, because we don't get the whole thing with Deadman interrogating Slick on the rooftop and then dropping him to his death, so that doesn't happen here.
Yeah, I think that's because they wanted to leave that.
For the ending.
Yeah.
The bar scene that follows, it's similar as well, only with Zatanna there, and Constantine explains that the Book of Darkness, it's the lost 6th book of Enoch, the source of all black magic in the world, and he promises to use it to bring Deadman back to life. And also...
Yeah, I was a bit surprised to hear the Book of Enoch, because I actually own the book. Yeah, that's not really. I mean, it is about, the angels and the falling of Lucifer and all that, but that's about it. I don't know where the rest. I would have preferred if they name dropped something a bit more rare, or just made some.
Yeah, not something you can go to your bookstore and buy, because I actually used to own like a small paperback of it. I don't have it anymore, I don't think.
Yeah, and it's tiny as well. It's a tiny little book.
And also, it's not specified what Constantine did with the ectoplasm here, but he still apologizes, and Zatanna backing him up gets Deadman to go along with the plan. And this is once again a scene where it's like, oh, we tried this team thing before, blah, 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 which I still just think is weird.
Just random.
It's very simplified, streamlined, blah.
Yeah, basically, to me, it seemed like a really sort of quick and dirty way to explain backstory without actually giving any backstory. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it just seemed a bit lazy.
Because it probably was somebody at Warner Brothers going, oh, the backstory is really tangled. All these different things have happened. There's all these different histories between the characters. So their idea is, oh, let's streamline it, but they did it in a bad way.
Yeah, exactly.
And Constantine then explains the plan, and we get visuals to go along with it. And this part reminds me of Shaun of the Dead, where Simon Pegg is laying out the plan. We're going to go here, and then we're going to go here, and we're going to go to the Winchester until it all blows over, and nothing goes to plan. So basically, you get a montage of images where they go to the morgue. Deadman possesses Haas's body without problems. They use Zatara's, awesome-looking, jet black plane to fly to Iraq, and then they go to the House of Agibi, which is depicted as this big fancy building, and then they use the card in the hand to enter the vault and get the book with no problems. None of those happen like that.
Yes.
And he also tells Zatanna that she'll need to use her magic to break whatever protection spells on the book. And I like that reason for bringing her along, because he figures, oh, of course there's going to be more security.
Yeah.
And this is when he finally says, oh yeah, there's some bad guys after the book as well, and suggests that they hire the big guy for muscle.
Mm.
And so that's when the group heads up to the Great Swamp in Putnam County, upstate New York, to try to recruit Swamp Thing, and they're followed by Woodrow. And this is very much a streamlining, let's get the budget down and get as few locations as possible, because they cut out the Louisiana thing completely.
Yeah, and if I may as well, I felt Swamp Thing was, like, disastrously cut out of this script. He barely appears.
Yeah.
Majority. And it was a massive shame, because he actually had some pretty good moments in the first script, but they're just gone for some reason. And clearly, I'm guessing it's a budgetary thing, and they didn't want to have, the makeup, the effects constantly on screen. But it's just, it feels less of a team. He feels less part of the team, And
even then, he was still pretty subdued in that first script.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, just the whole cutting out the Louisiana thing, and basically everything gets centralized around New York in this script, and I'm like, what is this, the Marvel universe? Because I'm just like, jack shit seems to happen in New York in the DC universe if you read the comics.
Yeah.
In fact, more stuff probably happens in Hellblazer in New York, because that's more real-world based than the rest of the DC universe.
Yeah, true.
And so they meet with Abby Arcane in her farmhouse, and she's in the process of moving out because she's just done with Swamp Thing's bullshit, basically. And because he won't even talk to her anymore, she doesn't think he's going to talk to them. But if they do manage to reach him, and Abby wants them to say that she misses him. And also she says here that, like, apparently Swamp Thing being part of the team was helping him come to terms with his transformation or something. And then when Constantine fucked off for 5 years, Swamp Thing went all emo and went out into the swamp or something. Like, much weaker motivation.
Yeah.
Especially since in the comics, they kicked Constantine out of the team for really stupid reasons.
Yeah. And it's interesting how the script does worse things than in the comics. When they had all that comic material to take from, they didn't bother. It's strange that.
Well, I will say the first script I actually preferred to the comics, because the comics just lose me after a certain point.
I mean,
I would put the Hellblazer stuff over, a good chunk of Hellblazer over both scripts.
A lot of it, yeah, I know what you mean.
Okay, so they drive out to the swamp in Constantine's shitty Toyota. I think it's funny that he has it's weird that he has a car, because it's a thing in the comics that Constantine can't drive. I just thought of that.
I mean, the whole thing with Chaz, that's the reason why Chaz is there.
But I mean, if Constantine could drive, he would have a shitty car, so.
Yeah. Speaking of, as well, I just wanted to bring this up because I didn't think of a better place to put it. It's weird that Constantine has a gun.
Oh yeah, he does.
It's really weird that, because I've never seen him ever carry a gun. So why put it in the script?
Well, there is, in the Family Man arc, he does have a gun, because that's Constantine versus just a garden variety serial killer.
Oh, okay. I don't think I've read that one.
Oh, it's one of the better parts of Delano's first run on the comic. It's
Delano. Okay.
It's one of the few where he's not going completely trippy weird for no reason.
Yeah.
That's the thing in Hellblazer, is that Delano is like the foundational run of that comic, and a lot of his run is really good. But he just loves to do like single issue or two issue stories of Constantine going into these weird fucking dream sequences that have nothing to do with anything. And it's like, why?
But you have to admit as well, a gun is not the norm for Constantine.
Well, especially since he's British.
Yeah, again, another reason.
And I actually think that arc makes a point, because he shoots down the Family Man. I think he actually throws away the gun and doesn't want to use one anymore.
Yeah, true.
So that's a thing. But they try to talk to Swamp Thing, and Zatanna is appealing to his emotions. Constantine offering to restore his humanity, and Deadman just straight up trying to shame him into helping, but it doesn't work. And they head back to the city. Yeah. And Woodrow, who has followed them out there, who apparently, it makes it look like he just walked all the way there. And that's the thing I had to wonder about the previous script as well, because even before he gets like his plant powers, partway through that, like, he's still like going on road trips and stuff. It's like, does he have like a plant mobile?
I was wondering that, and again, it's like plot convenience teleportation.
Yeah, again.
Yeah.
But Woodrow, he's seen all this, and he's awed by Swamp Thing's presence, and he breaks into Abby's house, seeing a picture of Alec Holland in human form with Abby, because apparently they were co-researchers in this version, which is different from the comics. But I can understand changing that because Swamp Thing has this weird, tangled history where Abby Arcane was originally a secondary character's love interest, and then that went all weird and creepy, and then she ended up as Swamp Thing's love interest. It's weird. So I can understand, streamlining that. And but then there's one of the team all together with Zatara, and he then snatches Abby with one of his Cthulhu creatures, determined to draw out Swamp.
Yeah, and what's hilarious about that as well is that he does that, and then it's like left for 90% of what's left until like the very, very end.
And there's mention of it, but that's it.
That's it, yeah, it was so weird.
And also, once again, it's kind of watered down because they don't have any history together in this. They just sort of run into each other. And so that's when we get the morgue scene, and it plays out almost exactly the same, only this time the detective is Jim Corrigan. Zatanna is here, and Clarion's animated corpses are just called zombies, even though they have the twisted necks like the Invunche.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, that they just omitted the talking about the Invunches.
And I'm okay with that, because I'm assuming somebody said, hey, the Invunche is actually a thing, maybe we should not just have them in here as throwaway minions.
There's worse.
Like, Zatanna's, her contribution to this is she basically collapses part of the ceiling on them, and Corrigan, and also at the end, after the fight ends, they shut Corrigan in the freezer when he pulls a gun on Constantine and tries to stop them. So that scene is almost exactly the same, except for Corrigan not the detective not dying because he's Jim Corrigan. And they then jump on Zatara's plane, which is bright red instead of black like in the montage, and they fly to Iraq, where they go to Al-Hilla, the current day site of ancient Babylon. So they've sort of what they've done here is that they've taken the whole vault thing from the previous draft and squished it into the Iraq stuff.
Yeah, and they've moved that around, so instead of the climax happening in Iraq, it moves back. It's a bit... I didn't like that because there was no defined progression. It's not, we're going to go from here to here to here, we're going to go to here, and then we're going to go back again, and then it just seemed all over the place and not very well organized.
Yeah. And okay, so it turns out that the House of Agibi is fronted by an ordinary-looking check-cashing center. That got kind of a chuckle out of me. And Blood gets them in by knowing the secret passwords. The bank card opens a secret door behind an ATM, which leads into an underground tunnel, where Deadman possesses a security golem, and they find a handprint scanner, which is supposed to open a security box, but they have the wrong hand, so that happens again. And then Constantine just bashes open the box and retrieves the key.
I just wanted to talk about that. He bashes open the security box. After all these incredibly contrived security, a rock opens the box. It was a bit shit.
Yeah, it was. And they opened an elevator, which takes them to Haas's vault with the Book of Darkness inside. Was that a number of steps really necessary?
It's just so ridiculous.
So
a vault to get into another vault. It's just so stupid.
Yeah, it's passwords, the secret ATM door, the golem, the handprint scanner, which is on a box, which then opens a door, which is actually an elevator. This is like some Rube Goldberg shit.
Yeah, and then there's still that magical orb thing they have to get through from the first script as well.
Yes, and in the vault there is the red globe thing, and they do the same things to get it out. They both tried... You have to mention the etheric spear he tries, because that actually ends up being important. And they open the book, and they see the star map from before, and Blood points out there's this dark area dividing the Milky Way. It's sometimes called the Dark Universe by theologians, where death and destruction originate. So, title drop. And then Woodrew appears, summoning his vine critters, which they go full force with the Cthulhu comparison, because there's a really big one that's called the Cthulhu Queen. And by the way, it's misspelled every time they use that word. And Constantine, he uses the turnabout spell on the Queen instead of Woodrew this time, and Blood bashes Woodrew's head in with the book. And they just manage to escape the Queen in the elevator, and they meet Swamp Thing at the top, who tells them about Abby's kidnapping. And Woodrew reappears right next to Swamp Thing, so teleportation again. Is he that guy from The Amazing Spider-Man who just teleports in through the shadows? And Swamp Thing, okay, so Woodrew, he says he wants them to join him in restoring the planet to how it should be, and that Abby is going to be sacrificed to God's wrath. Swamp Thing seems hypnotized by Woodrew, but Deadman jumps into his body to distract him, only to get lost in there. So that happens again.
Again, that scene from the original script that I really hated was when Swamp Thing was like, "No, you're actually killing the planet," and he believes him, and he just goes, "No, you're lying," blah blah blah, and it's bad writing. I hate that.
I love how Woodrow is like, "You're just jealous," which just makes me think of that scene in The Fly where Jeff Goldblum goes, "You're jealous."
Yeah.
Imagine Jeff Goldblum playing this character.
That would work.
But so Swamp Thing seems to be hypnotized by, Dead Man jumps into his body, and then Swamp Thing fights the Cthulhu Queen, which spills out into the streets, echoing both the Woodrue fight and the bullfight from the other draft. And then meanwhile, the other three, particularly Blood, fight Woodrue himself, and eventually Swamp Thing explodes, sending sharp bits of wood out that kill the Queen and Woodrue, freeing Dead Man, and then he respawns on a seat again. But Blood has lost the book, and we don't see that happen here. Like, it just happens off page.
Yeah, that was really annoying. It's like we don't see it. We don't get any sort of indication that that's going to happen. It's just plot convenience, plot contrivance, which I hate. One of the worst things.
Because at least in the last script, they showed that happening.
Yeah, they had the whole fight with the sort of baby Invonche thing, which was better.
Yeah, and I actually preferred the entire vault sequence from the previous draft. I like him just having his personal vault that we don't have to go on this, we're going to Iraq to do it, because it's like, eh.
Yeah, it was pointless. Because in the original script, going to Iraq was to stop the bad guy. Here, it's just an extra contrivance over the already contrived bank. You know?
Yeah, and so Woodrue or his minions got away with it. It's not clear which, because you don't see it happen. And so the citizens are all pissed off about what happened, and so they flee from them. And Constantine leads them to an alley where he locates the entrance to the Oblivion Bar. He's using those lenses from the other script. The scene's basically the same, except it's not in New York now. It's in Iraq. Yeah. And they regroup in the private room. Blood managed to save a handful of pages before he lost the book, but he can't really read the hodgepodge of dead languages. And he's just interpreting images of a spiral of blood sacrifices, and that's when Dead Man speaks up. Having gotten the backstory from Xanadu in the last draft only... Okay, I have to mention this because I forgot to mention this last time. Madame Xanadu is the one who gathers the team in the Justice League Dark comic for the first time.
Yeah.
And actually Constantine's only appearance in the first issue is right at the end, where he falls from a portal through the sky next to Big Ben going, "Ah!" So he's not the team leader by any means. Not in the first arc. When the next writer took over, the comic kind of rebooted itself, and Steve Trevor goes to him and goes, "Hey, get those guys back together." So then he kind of becomes the team leader.
Right.
But so yeah, it's a little bit more complicated. And also Xanadu and Dead Man do kind of have a thing in the comic too, but it never goes anywhere because Xanadu she specifically cuts that off. So now we learn about the Spectre. He was an angel named Oztar who sided with Lucifer in the war against God, getting sent to hell. He repented, though, and was reborn as a demon merged with a human host who acted as God's wrath. He caused the flood, Sodom and Gomorrah, and the plagues. And I'm guessing a couple other things as well that they just decided not to mention here. But he became too extreme, and God had him sealed away in the Dark Universe. This is just interesting because God in DC Comics is one of the most confusing things ever because he's depicted one way in Hellblazer, which granted, you can't take it literally because you're getting it from the First of the Fallen's point of view, and he's kind of an asshole anyways.
Yes.
Then he shows up in Lucifer, and he's portrayed completely differently. So it's like, what's going on here? So basically the Spectre wants to escape the Dark Universe now to bring God's wrath down and destroy civilization. And Dead Man chose to stay and help fight, just like in the other draft. And so they aren't sure where to go, but Blood is familiar with the legend thanks to Etrigan's proximity. So I thought that was kind of cool that him having Etrigan actually sort of helps out in the plot in a way other than just punching stuff.
Yeah, that was, it gave him more stuff to do, especially because he had the password thing as well. Contrivance with the bank aside. I like the fact that he wasn't just the Hulk this time, you know?
Yeah, he wasn't just the guy who could read the Book of Magic.
Yeah.
And so he talks about there was a cult that sprang up around Oztar, and it's interesting that they refer to him as God's Mistake, which I just thought was darkly funny. And a priest of that cult built a church near Times Square, and it's called like the Church of the Holy Prelature or something like that. And it's the one we saw earlier, and apparently he used it to lure in victims like a serial killer and just stuff the basement full of them. And so he thinks that's where Woodrue plans to sacrifice Abby, and the team decides to head back to New York. And then Zatanna and Constantine's plane conversation. I don't understand why they have to get on a plane, because if they go to the Oblivion Bar and it's interdimensional, can't they just take another door out and be back in New York?
Yeah, it's true. It's a bit... It wasn't really well, playing for that.
Yeah, I don't really know what the rules of that place are.
Yeah.
And so their conversation is pretty much the same, but it's made clear that Zatara was like... Constantine was always kind of a scalawag, but Zatara believed in him and tried to make him be a better person. And Constantine, apparently, it's vague here, but here it says that Constantine asked him to help at Newcastle, but he bit off more than he could chew, and Zatara ended up dead. That is a bit of a problem because the Newcastle incident is a very specific thing in Hellblazer, and Zatara and this team have nothing to do with it.
Yeah, and especially because of it was the main focal point of the TV show as well.
Which sadly we never got to see.
Sadly, yeah.
They had that plan for the back half of the season. We can always talk about it because I have 3 unfilmed episode scripts that we could do later on. I'll talk more about detail about that show and Constantine and Hellblazer and stuff like that if we ever do that.
Yeah.
But then that's the whole thing. If you, the showrunner was talking about the structure they had, working the Monster of the Week episodes, using that to introduce elements and building up to showing the Newcastle flashback. I'm like, ooh.
Yeah.
But here they've sort of conflated Newcastle with the seance from Moore's Swamp Thing where Zatara dies. And I feel like they could have just referenced that and then maybe referenced Newcastle as a separate thing.
I mean, that would have been better.
Okay, and so the plane attack goes much the same as before, only it's one of the Cthulhu things that attacks, not Clarion. And it takes out Swamp Thing almost instantly. Constantine scrambled to wet the Swamp Thing leaf as an attempt to make him respawn here. So that explains the whole weird thing where he's like, no, I'm not riding on the plane, even though he can teleport everywhere. He needs specifically this leaf. Here it's Constantine trying to get him to come back. Which makes a bit more sense.
Yeah.
And then the monster, it steals the pages of the book instead of the map here, and then they crash over the Sahara here instead of the other desert, and Blood collapses and falls unconscious instead of walking off. And so they all sit around the campfire of Constantine. This is where he makes his confession, and it's different here. And he says that the book won't actually help them, and he's just a bastard who made a deal to lead the bad guys to the book in exchange for a cure for his cancer, and then he uses the orb to teleport away, and we get to see him in the wrecked bomber from the other script, only here he's near the Al-Najaf International Airport in Iraq. Yeah. And then later, Blood comes to, and the team explains what Constantine told them, and then Blood says, hey, this is impossible because the book can't change someone's inevitable fate, and Constantine knows this, and so Zatanna figures that Constantine lied to keep them out of harm's way, and that he might be moving on to Spectre alone. Now, how do you feel about that change?
That was dumb. Because, first of all, the whole, I tricked you to get what I want. First of all, it puts way too much prominence on his condition, which shouldn't really be a factor here. It should be like it was in the other script,
Yeah.
Secondly, there's the whole, I betrayed you, I'm a bastard, I'm going. But it's then immediately resolved.
Yeah.
So what's the point? It's just pointless drama.
And also, we, the audience, know he didn't make a deal because we saw that scene and he didn't accept.
It's so stupid. It's just not necessary. It feels like script writing 101 because it's like, we now must meet. We must have the sort of liar reveal scene. That trope.
And
then it's like, and it's just so pointless. It's just completely pointless. It doesn't do anything. All it does is makes them slightly mad for a bit, but then they all go back to New York and it's back the way it was. Just get rid of that and make the script shorter or more condensed. Yeah, it's silly.
Yeah, and I think the whole him admitting that the book can't actually help them is enough of an admission to make them kind of angry.
Yeah, absolutely.
And him saying, this will help you to get someone to help him. It's a bastard thing to do, but it's also a very Constantine thing to do.
Yeah.
Because he manipulates everyone around him.
It's true.
And Constantine, he goes to Times Square and follows a dark alley to the Spectre's church, and he's stopped outside by Jim Corrigan, who wants to place Constantine under arrest, and shoots him in the gut when he won't comply, and we're just going to leave that there. We're not going to bring any current events context into this. Let's just not talk about that.
No,
And so,
yeah.
and
Moving along.
Constantine, he seems really like not bothered at all by his stomach wound in this version.
Oh yeah, because when you read it, it's like it didn't even happen, really.
Yeah, and so Constantine just hypnotizes him and tells him to piss off, which makes him just kind of his eyes glaze over and he wanders off into Times Square. And then he enters the church, and where he finds a hidden trap door into the priest's side of the confessional booth, which leads to a room filled with books and sigils, and he pulls one of the books to reveal a hidden passageway behind it, which, okay, first, a lot of steps again, and also this is reminding me of the case of Charles Dexter Ward, the Lovecraft story, where he finds the tunnels, only this is nowhere near as cool.
Mm.
And also, he's finding the Spectre's nutty cave here.
Yeah.
He follows the passage to a circular shaft, descends a spiral staircase, finding himself in the dark room. It gets lit up by the stars shining from the now opened book as Woodrue reads from it, and Clarion paints sigils around the bone altar in Abby's blood. It's like an altar that's like built of like piled up bones, I think. It's not described in any detail. And so Abby, she's tied to a stake behind Woodrue, so just like in the other draft. And Spectre then speaks, granting them their wishes and imbuing them with power for serving him well. Clarion becomes big and strong, while Woodrue becomes more plant-like, so he gets his Floronic Man powers here without ever actually being called the Floronic Man in this draft. And he shoots...
Doesn't he call himself the Floronic?
Yeah, he calls himself that, but the script doesn't call him that. It doesn't make the switch. And he shoots tendrils from his hands that rip up into the streets and cause havoc. And Constantine then reveals his presence, and he moves to fight Clarion with his etheric spear thing, who has now become a disproportionate muscle man, and all I'm thinking of is it just blue Brock Lesnar. But Zatanna shoots her blue lightning at the monster before the fight can begin, as the rest of the team has arrived. So that whole third act misunderstanding thing had 0 points.
Yeah, you might as well just get it out of the script.
It's like a romantic comedy third act without like the dramatic run to the airport at the end.
Yeah, it really is. It's just absolutely pointless.
And Woodrue moves to sacrifice Abby, but Swamp Thing attacks, getting thrown aside by tendrils and nearly crushed by Woodrue, before Zatanna immobilizes both the Plant Man and Clarion with her magic. They both start to laugh, though, saying they can't stop what's already been started, and the massive white eye of the Spectre opens, which that was a cool image of them just being little specks in front of his eye. Before he crashes out onto the streets of New York and causes a mass panic. Now, I have a question, because there's a change here that makes me kind of question things.
Yeah.
Because it's not specified that they just barely nick her throat and cause a single drop of blood to land on the ground in this version, so what finished the ritual here?
I mean, I was really confused because when I read it, it seemed like they did just stab her. I'll go back to the script, but I'm fairly certain
it's very... He moves at her with his scythe, but it's not specified that he actually draws blood.
No, there's no mention of blood. It just mentions the stabbing. But yeah, I know what you mean. It was very confusing.
Yeah, it's strange the way it's written. Okay, so the team realizes that fighting the Wrath of God is pointless, but they all end up fighting it anyways, so bleh. So Constantine tells them to pray while he walks over and gets the massive spirit's attention. I love him just talking shit to the Spectre. It's so fun.
I mean, that makes more sense than, Doctor Strange.
Yeah. And he tells him he knows it needs a host and tries to talk it into taking him as one. It doesn't work, though, when the Spectre is about to attack Constantine, but Zatanna intervenes with the team deciding that they're going to fight regardless. And then Clarion pops up, and blood willingly changes into Etrigan to fight him. And Woodrue starts making redwood trees grow out of his hands, which is weird the way it's described.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why it needs to be redwood.
But it's like it's coming out of his hands, but also popping up out of the ground at the same time because they're going up vertically.
Yeah, it was very strange. I assumed it was like, it would look like tentacles almost coming out of his hand. They would go under the ground and come up, but it never actually specifies them going under the ground first.
Yeah, that's what I have to assume is what they mean, but it's still weird. But
it's just not very well described.
Yeah, but Constantine gets caught in its branches before Dead Man saves him by possessing him, and he does his acrobatic stuff to like get him out of the tree.
Yeah,
and Zatanna tries to paralyze the Spectre with her magic, but the stress is too much and she can't keep it up. And Woodrue sprouts another redwood, which catches Constantine in it again, so that whole rescue was pointless. While the Spectre spits out an army of wraiths that the Dead Man fights. And that's one thing I like about this draft is that the actual ending fight, it kind of plays to the character strengths, the individual character strengths a bit more.
Yeah, they all have something to fight in their own way.
And, so Clarion and Etrigan continue to fight, and Swamp Thing grows to giant size to fight Spectre head on, and it's described as the avatar of life versus the avatar of death. And yet another redwood sprout is catching Zatanna in its branches and putting her on Constantine's level, although you'd have to bring her down to put her on Constantine's level, but wordplay aside.
Yeah.
And his bullet wound finally comes back. She notices it, jumps over to him, heals it with a spell, telling him it's not permanent and that he'll still need a doctor after she kisses him and then flies off. And that kiss moment works better here because she doesn't have a Big Bang Theory watching fiance.
Yeah, but it's the whole backstory stuff that, although the team backstory is annoying, they didn't do the failed relation, which is I believe is what we did about enough as well.
They seem to imply there was maybe something there in this version, but they don't go into it.
Yeah.
And Constantine doesn't obsess over it either way. And so we go to the Spectre, who flies off over the ocean with Zatanna in pursuit, and lands in the ocean and fights Swamp Thing, with Swamp Thing at first seeming to rot away, but he rejuvenates himself, and he tosses the Spectre so far that he lands on the outskirts of New York. And while that's going on, Constantine climbs down Woodrew's tree and attacks him with that etheric dagger, knocking him down and bashing his head in with the crucifix. But then Woodrew jabs Constantine in the leg with a syringe, hitting him with a dose of flesh-eating bacteria. That made more sense for just being part of his powers. And elsewhere, Zatanna summons all of the magic on Earth to seal the Spectre inside one of those red sphere things, and this cuts off its power, which that allows Constantine to burn Woodrew down with his Zippo, and it returns Clarion to his normal state and gets subdued by Etrigan. So there is no, this place is supercharged with oxygen, like I'm just going to burn you because you're made of plants.
Yeah, that made more sense, because I hated that.
And so Zatanna can't hold the Spectre indefinitely, though, and it breaks out, flying towards Constantine, who just basically plays chicken with it. And he stands there, pulls out his orb, and mutters a spell, teleporting out just as the Spectre flies through him and runs straight into Jim Corrigan, who now serves as its host. And I'm like, wow, okay, so in this version, the spell actually works on the final track.
Yeah. I mean, that actually made it better, because it gave it a bit more, it was a bit more of an obvious Chekhov's gun,
Yeah. And also, good thing it was Corrigan who was walking by. And can you imagine if it was the Ryan Reynolds Hal Jordan just randomly walking by?
I mean, yeah, again, bit contrived, if I may say so.
Well, I mean, it was already set up that he was mindlessly wandering around Times Square, so
I guess, but it's like I think they could have set it up better. Like, I would have preferred it if they said something along the lines of he was destined to be the host spirit.
Yeah, something like that, or Constantine realized that.
Yeah, something. Instead of just, this is a happy accident.
Okay, so the rest of the team is catching their breath when Swamp Thing spots Abby lying dead in the ruins, and then he holds her close and screams as his chest opens up, exposing his heart, and he connects to the green, which somehow rekindles the spark of her life and resurrects her, so kind of Guardians of the Galaxy-ish at the end.
Yeah.
And the team then finds that Constantine has disappeared and the book is in ashes on the ground. So that's all the same as before. Zatanna pockets Constantine's later, and it cuts to 6 months later where Dead Man, he's once again tracking the guy that he was chasing in the earlier scene. So instead of, him being a different guy, it's the same guy, which doesn't really make a difference. But he gets interrupted by Constantine, who says the guy didn't do it, but he says that the team can help him find out. And the whole team is there with him in this scene, too. And they've been joined by Jim Corrigan, the newly minted Spectre, who unleashes the Spectre on the guy who judges him a sinner and then kills him. So he's very Ghost Rider right there.
To be honest, I don't know if it was just, something about me, but it reminded me of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
I have no idea what you're talking about, because I've only seen 2 episodes.
Alright, it's just every so often the main character, Yugi, would occasionally just send people to like this oblivion place. It felt very similar to that in a very cheesy way,
And okay, so I find it very funny that the thing that was like trying to destroy the world and tried to kill all of them, they're just cool with it being on the team now that it has a host.
Yeah, I'd be a bit, is this guy okay? Should we be trusting this guy?
Yeah, because it reminds me of, I don't know if you saw The Expendables, the first movie.
No.
Okay, so Dolph Lundgren's character in that is, he's dealing with a lot of like mental health things. He's going kind of crazy, and the long and the short of it is that Stallone kicks him off the team, and then Lundgren basically sells him out to the bad guys. There's this whole scene where he's trying to kill Stallone and Jet Li, and then he gets incapacitated. Then the last scene of the movie, they're just sitting in a bar together drinking like it's no problem. Like, what the fuck?
Right, okay.
It reminds me of that.
Yeah.
And so Constantine then says, oh, okay, we have this new threat we need to stop, because if we don't stop whatever this thing is going to happen in a certain amount of time, then the moon is going to become a portal, and Eclipso is going to emerge and is going to destroy the universe. And so they need to do that, so sequel hook. And I know nothing about Eclipso, so this is beyond my knowledge. And then he says, like, he's talking Dead Man into rejoining. He says that there's two very special magic words I've learned from Satara that are useful in a time like this. Fuck it. And that's the ending.
Yeah.
I like that as the last line.
Oh, yeah, it was very constant.
I mean, this is the guy who cons the devil, essentially, into curing his cancer and then gives him the finger after he's done.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, this script it's okay. The first script is messier, but I generally prefer the directions that went in a little bit more than this, because it was just a little bit more interesting to me, the whole Bowl of Heaven thing, as opposed to the Spectre.
I think if this script had kept pretty much all the plot the same, with the same bad guys, the same people, but kept some of the more streamlining changes. Like, I preferred the fact that Clarion, Woodrue are, together at the start, rather than just, Clarion decides to do this because, fuck it, I don't know.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
Yeah. So neither script is better than the other, but because they both have problems, but they're very different problems. I think if it needed another draft, is what I'm saying, where you take the best parts, both of those, and then you have the perfect script,
Yeah, I know what you mean. And the Spectre is just a worse villain to me than Woodrue and the Bowl of Heaven.
Well, he's a worse villain because he's more of a hero. Everyone knows him more of a hero than a villain.
Yeah.
So it doesn't work because everyone knows it's going to work out.
Yeah. And his inclusion is weird because if you look at like the various interviews Guillermo del Toro did, he seemed to kind of go back and forth on whether or not Spectre would be on the team. So I don't know how much of this comes from ideas he was toying with, or if this was just, in the months after he left, if this was just Warner Brothers tinkering.
It's possible that he ended up on the cutting room floor and people decided, this is interesting, let's put this back in.
Yeah, and so this draft occupies this weird middle ground because no other director had been hired yet. And it wasn't until August of 2016 it was announced that Doug Liman was signed on to direct. Now, he's the guy who did, let me pull up his filmography, just to sort of give you a refresher. He did the Firstborn Identity before they got handed off to Paul Greengrass, Edge of Tomorrow, and like some other stuff. Like, nothing like really stand out. It's not like Del Toro where it's like, oh yeah, he's done this, and this, all that's cool. But he is a solid director.
Yeah, I mean, like, films like Edge of Tomorrow, but he's not, I wouldn't say there's anything really noticeable.
Yeah, that is fair. And so he was on it for a while. And the concept art that's just been coming out in like the past couple weeks, like, I think it was literally like last week when like people started posting this stuff on Instagram, was for his version. And you can tell that his version, still used elements of this because Clarion is in one of the pieces, and it's this weird scene. It's a scene that's not in the script, but it's this weird scene of Clarion wanting to go on the hooker that John is fucking.
Yeah.
And like the concept art, like I said, shows the morgue scene, basically.
Yeah.
However, there's also like things like the Swamp Thing concept art is showing a scene where he's like responding to arsonists setting the swamp on fire, which we don't see here. And there's the picture of the Spectre that was shown it's Jim Corrigan with the Spectre in him, and he's been arrested. So that's not in here. So I'm guessing that they took elements of these drafts and built on them for a new version that we still haven't seen.
Hopefully. I mean, that's literally what I just said should have happened. So hopefully we'll get to read that and it's the perfect script, but then be sad that it wasn't.
Yeah, that's true. And so more or less what happened was that, he was on it for a while, and then in May 2017 he left because another project he was developing for Lionsgate, which was Chaos Walking, which is a YA adaptation of books that are actually supposed to be pretty good. I've not read them, but when I saw this connected to this, I read a little bit about it. So it sounded interesting. And that was a movie that was like, he got the green light for it, he went and filmed it. And then Lionsgate said, we want reshoots, but they couldn't do the reshoots because Daisy Ridley is starring in the movie. And they needed to wait until after she was done working on Rise of Skywalker. They went and did the reshoots with Fede Alvarez directing them. And it has sat on the shelf for ages now. So that's...
Is there like any sort of talk of that being released, or is it like dead?
It's probably going to get released. They just don't know when to do it, I don't think. I think it's something that where they were probably trying to figure out what the release was going to be, and then the pandemic happened and kind of screwed that up.
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised if that had something to do with it. And so while that was going on, it was also around this time that Universal announced that their cinematic universe for their monster characters was going to be called the Dark Universe, and that apparently caused like something of a hubbub at Warner Brothers, and they were actually considering suing Universal over it.
That would be interesting.
Which ended up not being a problem because no one gives a shit anymore.
Nope. I mean, they literally solved themselves by releasing a terrible movie.
Yep. And now they're just working on making random unconnected movies.
Which I'm all for.
Yeah, I am too, but I mean, I would kind of like to see like a House of Frankenstein kind of thing done eventually, but that's me. And I do think that they are just, taking every random pitch they're getting now, which I can tell you about that off mic. But no,
I mean, I'm kind of over the cinematic universe thing anyway.
Well, I mean, I don't think they need to approach it as a cinematic universe, just like, oh, hey, there's a Frankenstein and the Dracula ball. I'd like to see something like that personally as a fan. But leaving that aside. But it was that year at Comic-Con when they finally said, yeah, we're just going to call the movie Justice League Dark. So they just decided, yeah, we're not bothering with the whole Dark Universe thing. And I should say there is another script they got out where it's, I have my doubts as to its authenticity, but it's called Dark Justice. And so that's a thing that I'm not covering because I don't really think it's real because it's attributing itself to a story based on a story by Guillermo del Toro, but it really doesn't resemble these scripts in any way at all, so I don't think it's real.
Right.
So that's a thing. And then after that, it just kind of sat around, and they were apparently auditioning other directors, and none of them really impressed Warner Brothers enough, so they kind of put the project on ice. And one of them did a thing where he released a bunch of concept art that he had done for himself, and it was okay. It was basically just kind of like, here's concepts, and here's making them kind of look like certain actors. And there was one which was modeled after a photo of the David Tennant Doctor with a different actor's face on it.
Huh. Okay.
And that was interesting. And there was another one where they said, we don't want you to direct, but we'll let you polish the script. And it was Gerard Johnstone who did a movie called Housebound, which they apparently were impressed with, which I've not seen, but I've heard it's good.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. It's I don't know. I wasn't impressed. It wasn't me. Because it was a horror film, but it also had random comedy that was sort of a bit out of place. If it's the film I'm thinking of, that is.
Is that one of your Amazon Prime films that you watched?
Yeah, that's when I did my Amazon Prime deep dive thing, and it's like, yeah, it wasn't great.
But yeah, so he apparently was brought in to polish the script, and then nothing was really reported for a while. Until early this year when apparently there was a deal that was put together with Bad Robot to work with both. They got both the film and the TV rights, and they're apparently working with HBO Max to do a series now.
I am so sick of
it. I mean, again, it wouldn't surprise me if nothing actually happened because it wouldn't be the first time that Bad Robot has picked up the rights to something and then done nothing with it.
True.
Because they were the first company to buy the rights to the Dark Tower.
Oh.
And they were like, oh, let's get Damon Lindelof to write the script. He said, okay, I'll do it after I'm finished with Lost. And then he finished Lost and decided he didn't want to do it anymore. And then more recently, they picked up the rights to do stuff with both Half-Life and Portal, and they were talking to Guillermo del Toro about it, and nothing happened. So it wouldn't surprise me that if this does happen, it's because HBO Max is involved and they want content.
Yeah.
So
just reading the news thing. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested, cautiously interested to see how it turns out, but who knows at this point.
This is a bit of a tangent, by the way, but I'm kind of annoyed. This article says John Constantine (brackets) who was portrayed by Keanu Reeves, 2005 live action. No love for the TV show. Apparently. Sorry.
I mean, these are the same. I mean, people who write these articles are the same morons who insist on repeatedly referring to the Hannibal TV show as a Silence of the Lambs prequel.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's the thing. Maybe it'll be good, but I think if Del Toro really had gotten to work on his version and I think he would have hammered out a lot of the problems with the script in development if he had gone into serious pre-production on it. I would have much preferred seeing his version.
Yeah.
Then again, who knows? Maybe this could be awesome. Maybe they could get Matt Ryan involved.
I would hope so.
Yeah, I would hope so too. Although they didn't even get him for that audio drama Sandman thing. So
yeah, but I would say that's a separate. I could accept that.
Yeah, although it is kind of funny that they went and got another Welshman.
Yeah. But hey, there's hope for me.
But no, that's Justice League Dark. Interesting scripts, not flawless, but you could definitely tell there was something here, and it would have been, if they did make it, it would have been one of the better DC movies.
Yeah, but that's it.
I mean, they've been getting better, but
they have, but it's been a tough.
Yeah, it's been. I mean, it's even the ones where I do like them. It's kind of, I mean, I like Aquaman, but I mean, they kind of overstuffed that movie.
Yeah, and
Birds of Prey is just weird.
I've not seen it.
It's not awful. It's just odd the way they did it. Like, they do this weird non-linear plot thing, which doesn't quite work for me in that movie.
Okay.
But no, that's Justice League Dark, and I honestly don't know what else we'd say about it. But
yeah, anything else to be said would also be said for previous script.
Yeah, and so that is that for this episode, guys. And until next time, bye.
Bye-bye.